The rain lashed against the window of the command office, a relentless gray curtain that blurred the sharp lines of the Eagle Ridge Air Force Base. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the electric hum of high-end computer monitors. Colonel Marcus Hale didn't look at the rain. He didn't look at the sprawling Nevada desert that lay beyond the glass. His focus was entirely on the 7 pages of paper held between his fingers, a report that felt like a personal insult to his 30 years of service. With a movement that was both casual and devastating, he grabbed the folder off the mahogany table, stepped toward the window, and flung it out into the downpour. He didn't watch it fall. He didn't care that 6 months of meticulous calculations, 49 rigorous simulations, and the weight of a young woman's career were now dissolving in a muddy puddle 3 stories below. He turned back slowly, his boots clicking with rhythmic precision on the polished floor. He pointed a single, trembling finger directly at Emma Carter's face, his eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. He told her that she was there to touch the planes, to turn the wrenches, and to follow the checklists. He told her, in a voice that rumbled like a distant storm, that she was never to think about the planes. He warned her that if she ever stepped foot near his briefing room again, he would personally ensure that she never touched an aircraft for the rest of her natural life. Emma Carter stood perfectly still. Her hands were empty, her uniform was crisp, and her eyes were as steady as a horizon line. She didn't blink. She didn't argue. She didn't have to. Every single number, every decimal point, and every thermal stress trajectory from those 7 pages was burned into the architecture of her mind, perfectly intact, and ready for the moment the world finally caught up to her. Emma had been at Eagle Ridge for 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. She knew the duration down to the minute because she recorded everything in a small, brown, leather-bound notebook she kept in the left chest pocket of her flight suit, resting right over her heart. It wasn't a countdown to freedom or a ledger of grievances. Emma Carter simply lived her life through the lens of data. Patterns, observations, the subtle anomalies in the way a turbine hummed, it all went into the book. This habit had begun when she was 9 years old in Boise, Idaho. While other children were playing in the dirt or watching cartoons, Emma was sitting at her father's scarred kitchen table, filling composition notebooks with the things no one else noticed. She tracked the migration of birds, the varying yields of the local potato crops, and the exact time the morning fog lifted from the valley. Her father had been a crop duster. He wasn't a hero of the sky in the way the pilots at Eagle Ridge were. There were no medals or supersonic booms in his wake. He flew an old Grumman Ag Cat, low and slow, banking over the endless green fields of Idaho in the golden light of dawn. Emma would sit on the fence at the edge of their property, the wood grain pressing into her palms, and watch him move. He didn't fly by instruments alone. He read the wind with his body. He taught her that the sky wasn't something you could master with a book, though he respected her love for them. He told her the sky had to be earned. It had to be respected. And then, when Emma was 14, the sky took him back. It wasn't a dramatic explosion or a dogfight. It was an engine failure, quiet, mundane, and preventable. The plane simply lost its breath 3 miles from home because a small, obscure component that should have been serviced months prior had been overlooked by a mechanic who was tired or lazy, or perhaps just didn't see the pattern. Emma read the official accident report 17 times. She memorized the cold, clinical language that described the final moments of her father's life. And in that grief, a quiet, absolute certainty was born. She decided she would spend her life making sure no one else died because something broke that shouldn't have. She would be the shield between the machine and the human, the one who saw the failure before it became a tragedy. She enlisted at 19, bypassing the more glamorous roles to choose aviation mechanics. She didn't just pass her tests, she demolished them. She finished at the top of her class, not just among the women, but across the entire cohort of enlisted personnel and officers alike. Her instructors were unsettled by her. Most students struggled with the complex hydraulics of a landing gear system or the intricate software of a modern sensor array. Emma looked at them and saw the logic as clearly as a map. Master Sergeant Diane Aucoffer, a woman who had seen 3 decades of mechanics pass through her hangar, had pulled Emma aside after her final evaluation. Aucoffer told her that the military didn't know what to do with people like her, people who were too right, too early. She told Emma to be patient. Emma was good at patience. She had practiced it since the day the Ag Cat went down in the Idaho dirt. Eagle Ridge was her second posting, a transfer she had fought for. Her first post in Virginia had been a waste of her talents, spent on the routine maintenance of transport planes that were essentially flying buses. She wanted the machines that lived on the edge of physics. She wanted the F-22 Raptors and the F-35s, aircraft so complex that they were less like vehicles and more like sentient organisms of titanium and silicon. She submitted a 3-page letter to the Pentagon itself, explaining why her skills were being wasted. 6 weeks later, she was on a transport flight to the Nevada desert. She arrived in January, greeted by a cold that felt like a physical weight. The desert at night was a different world, silent and predatory. Her supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Raymond Gloss, was a man who seemed to have been carved out of a block of old wood. He looked at her record, then looked at her small frame and let out a grunt that managed to convey deep skepticism and a lack of interest all at once. He told her that book scores didn't mean anything in the real world. He pointed her toward Bay 3 and told her to stay in her lane. Emma didn't argue. She went to the 217, an F-22 with a history of minor sensor glitches, and performed the pre-flight checklist. Within an hour, she had found 3 things that weren't on the official list but were clearly drifting toward failure. She wrote them in her notebook. She didn't say a word. She was waiting. The social geography of Eagle Ridge was as rigid as the flight paths of the jets. The pilots were the gods of this world. They were physical specimens of perfection, men and women who spoke in a language of G-forces and Mach numbers. They lived behind a pane of invisible, bulletproof glass. They had their own mess halls, their own briefing rooms, and a confidence that bordered on the divine. Captain David Mercer was the golden boy of this elite group. At 29, he was already a legend in the making, a third-generation pilot with a record that was as flawless as his jawline. He wasn't arrogant in the way a lesser man might be. He was simply aware that he was the tip of the spear. Emma's first real interaction with Mercer happened on a Tuesday in February. She was finishing a post-flight inspection on his Raptor when she found the microfracture. It was buried deep in a fuel line connector, a flaw so small it was invisible to the naked eye. But Emma had felt the slight irregularity in the pressure readings during the engine run-up. She had mapped the temperature differentials and the way the metal expanded under stress. She knew that under certain high-altitude conditions, this tiny crack would cause a pressure spike that the pilot would never see coming until the engine flamed out. She wrote the report and gave it to Gloss. Gloss dismissed it immediately. He told her the gauge was within tolerance. Emma tried to explain that the gauge only showed the present, not the trajectory of the future. She tried to tell him about thermal stress cycles, but Gloss just told her to log it and move on. She did as she was told, but she kept a copy of the data in her notebook. 3 weeks later, she checked the 217 again. The fracture had grown by exactly 0.4 millimeters, precisely as her calculations had predicted. This time, Gloss sent the report to Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, the maintenance officer. Patterson was polite, but his politeness was a wall. He asked if she had a degree in aerospace engineering. When she said no, he told her that her job was to follow the manual, not to rewrite it. He treated her like a child who had brought a drawing to a board meeting. Emma returned to Bay 3. She didn't feel angry. She felt the cold, hard weight of a looming disaster. She realized that the people in charge weren't just ignoring her. They were incapable of seeing what she saw. They trusted the system, and the system was built on the assumption that anything not in the manual didn't exist. So Emma began to seek out a different kind of truth. She found the simulation room. The sim room was located at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor in the operations building. It housed 4 full-motion flight simulators that were the most advanced pieces of training technology in the world. They were reserved for pilots, for the elite who needed to practice mission profiles. They were not meant for mechanics. But Emma had noticed that between the hours of 11 o'clock p.m. and 5 o'clock a.m., the room was a tomb. The doors were often left unlocked by tired instructors, and the security cameras were focused on the entrances, not the cockpits. On her 3rd week at the base, Emma had stepped inside. She didn't touch anything at first. She just stood there, breathing in the scent of ozone and electronics, reading the interface panels. Within 2 weeks, she was running scenarios. She wasn't just learning to fly, she was learning to fight. She understood the mechanics of the planes better than any pilot, but now she was learning the soul of the machine. She used her notebook to track every move, every response of the computer-controlled enemies. She began to build her own scenarios based on open-source intelligence she gathered from military journals and declassified reports. She studied the way adversarial air forces in the East were training. She looked at their formation patterns, their radar signatures, and their tactical preferences. And then she found it, the Northeast Corridor Gap. It was a mathematical ghost. It only appeared under a very specific set of circumstances, a combination of atmospheric pressure, thermal stress on the defensive aircraft, and a particular compression strike pattern from the enemy. If an adversary attacked through the Northeast sector while the American defensive line was stretched thin, there was a window of 8 to 11 minutes where the sensors on the F-22s would experience a momentary lag. It was a flaw in the integration software, a seam where the different systems didn't quite mesh. Emma ran the simulation 47 times. The results were always the same. If the enemy knew where to look, they could fly right through the front door of the most advanced defense system on the planet. She spent a month refining the data. She created 7 pages of diagrams, heat maps, and probability tables. She didn't just show the problem, she showed the solution, a simple software patch and a shift in the defensive rotation. She gave it to Gloss. Gloss gave it to Patterson. And Patterson, perhaps hoping to impress the commanding officer with the eccentricity of his staff, gave it to Colonel Marcus Hale. That was how Emma ended up in the office, watching her life's work get thrown into the rain. She didn't quit. She didn't even slow down. She went back to the hangar and picked up a torque wrench. She felt the vibration of the base, the constant, low-frequency thrum of power that everyone else took for granted. But as she worked on the landing gear of a transport plane, she felt a presence behind her. It was Captain Mercer. He was standing there, his flight helmet tucked under his arm, looking at the nose of his Raptor. He looked bothered. He stood there for several minutes, staring at a specific section of the forward sensor array. Emma didn't wait for him to speak. She told him that the third bracket from the left was misaligned by 2 degrees. She told him the shadow it cast was the giveaway. Mercer looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He crouched down, squinted at the bracket, and then looked back at her with a mix of surprise and genuine curiosity. He asked her how she could possibly see that from 10 feet away. Emma told him that she didn't just see it. She knew it was coming because the vibration patterns on the last 3 sorties had been inconsistent with a perfect alignment. Mercer didn't dismiss her. He stayed there and talked to her. He asked her how long she had been at Eagle Ridge. He mentioned that he had heard about her report, the one Hale had discarded. He asked her what was in it. Emma felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She explained the vulnerability in the Northeast sector. She spoke about the thermal stress on the 217 and 219. She watched Mercer's face as he processed the information. He was a pilot. He lived in the world of the if and the when. He didn't see her as a mechanic overstepping her bounds. He saw her as a source of intelligence. He asked her how she had modeled the enemy's strike pattern. When she mentioned the simulations, he went quiet. He knew the risk she was taking. He told her he couldn't promise anything, but he asked to see the data. Emma reached into her flight suit and pulled out a fresh copy. She always had a copy. Mercer took it, folded it once, and put it in his pocket. It was the first time an officer had treated her words with the same respect as a physical component of the aircraft. As he walked away, Emma recorded the interaction in her notebook. She felt the weight of the situation shifting. The air on the base was changing. The rumors of regional incursions and threat escalations were no longer just whispers in the hallways. They were becoming the foundation of every briefing. April brought a dust storm that paralyzed the base. The sky turned a bruised, sickly orange, and the wind carried a fine, abrasive grit that got into everything. The jets were grounded, their intakes covered with heavy tarps. In the silence of the grounded base, the tension grew. Emma overheard fragments of conversations between senior officers, words like airspace contact and increased likelihood. She knew the clock was ticking. She went to Gloss one last time. She tried to warn him about the 217 and the 219, the 2 aircraft that would be the first to respond to a northern incursion. She told him they were vulnerable. Gloss looked at her, and for a moment the mask of the career soldier slipped. He looked tired. He told her that he believed she saw something, but he also told her that he couldn't help her. The system was bigger than both of them. He told her to write it up again, promising to pass it along, but they both knew it was a hollow gesture. Patterson had already blocked her. Hale had already silenced her. Emma wrote the final report anyway. It was the best thing she had ever produced, 8 pages of absolute, undeniable proof. She submitted it, and 2 days later it came back with a single handwritten line across the top. Outside scope of maintenance function. The rejection didn't stop her. It clarified her purpose. She realized that she was no longer working for the Air Force. She was working for the pilots who didn't know they were flying into a trap. She was working for her father. On the night after the dust storm broke, she couldn't sleep. The desert air was crisp and cold, the stars hanging like diamonds over the silent hangars. She went to the simulation room at 4 a.m. She ran the Northeast Corridor scenario for the 51st time. She updated the atmospheric data, accounting for the lingering dust in the upper atmosphere. The window of vulnerability hadn't just remained, it had expanded. The gap was now nearly 12 minutes wide. She sat in the darkened cockpit of the simulator, the faint glow of the instruments reflecting in her eyes. She thought about the 217, the plane with the micro-fracture in the fuel line. She thought about Mercer, who would likely be the one flying it. She thought about the 8 pages of data that were currently sitting in a trash can or a forgotten filing cabinet. She felt a profound sense of isolation, the kind of loneliness that comes from being the only person who can see a bridge collapsing while the cars continue to speed across it. And then she heard it. A heavy, rhythmic footstep in the corridor outside. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached for the power switch, her fingers hovering over the toggle. If she was caught here, she was done. No more Eagle Ridge, no more planes, no more chance to fix what was coming. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Emma held her breath, the silence in the sim room so heavy it felt like a physical weight. She waited for the handle to turn, for the light to spill in, for the voice of a security officer to end her career. The silence stretched. Seconds felt like hours. And then the footsteps began again, moving slowly away toward the far end of the building. Emma didn't move for a long time. She stayed in the darkness, her hand still trembling slightly. She realized then that the world wouldn't give her permission to be right. It wouldn't hand her a medal for seeing the truth. If she was going to save them, she would have to do it from the shadows. She would have to be the ghost in the machine, the silent architect of a victory that no one would ever know she had designed. She powered down the simulator with practiced, silent motions. She stepped out into the hallway, the cool air hitting her face like a benediction. She walked back to her barracks, her mind already moving to the next day, to the 217, and to the small, brown notebook that held the future of Eagle Ridge. She knew the storm was coming. She could feel it in the way the wind moved across the desert, the same way her father had felt it over the potato fields of Idaho. The sky was about to be earned, and Emma Carter was the only one who had already paid the price. The following morning, the base was a hive of controlled chaos. The grounding order had been lifted, and the roar of engines returned to the valley, a sound that usually comforted Emma but now sounded like an alarm. She saw Mercer on the flight line. He didn't speak to her, but he gave her a sharp, knowing nod as he walked toward his aircraft. It was the nod of a man who had read her report and had seen the logic within it. It wasn't an official endorsement, but it was an alliance. Emma spent the day in Bay 3, her hands moving with a fluid, unconscious grace. She worked on a cooling fan for an F-35, but her mind was on the Northeast Corridor. She was calculating the fuel burn rates and the sensor refresh cycles. She was imagining the engagement, the way the enemy would come in low to avoid the primary radar, the way they would wait for the thermal stress to peak before making their move. She was the only person on the base who wasn't looking at what was happening. She was looking at what was about to happen. As the sun began to dip toward the jagged peaks of the mountains, casting long, purple shadows across the tarmac, a siren began to wail. It wasn't the standard drill tone. It was the real thing, scramble. Emma stood at the edge of the hangar, her wrench still in her hand, and watched the pilots run toward their jets. She saw Mercer climbing into the cockpit of the 217. She saw the ground crews pulling the chocks, the engines screaming as they came to life. She felt the heat of the exhaust, the smell of burnt JP-8 fuel filling her lungs. She watched the 4 Raptors taxi out, their shapes sleek and predatory in the twilight. They took off in pairs, their afterburners lighting up the desert like fallen stars. They were heading north-northeast. Emma pulled her notebook from her pocket and checked the time. 18:42. She looked at the sky, the vast, unforgiving blue that had claimed her father. She didn't pray, she didn't believe in luck. She believed in the numbers. She believed in the 0, 4 millimeters of a crack that she had measured. She believed in the 12-minute window. And she knew that in less than an hour, the world would finally know her name, or it would never know anything at all. The base operations center was a fortress of glass and steel, and while Emma was barred from its inner sanctum, she could feel the tension radiating through the hangar walls. Every mechanic, every technician, and every fuel loader had paused. The usual banter of the flight line had evaporated, replaced by the heavy, expectant silence of a base at war. Emma moved to the back of the hangar, near a small radio that the crews used to monitor local frequencies. It wouldn't give her the encrypted tactical data, but the chatter of the base's internal logistics would tell her enough. She heard the calls for secondary fuel tankers. She heard the frantic coordination of the search and rescue teams being put on standby. Her heart was a steady rhythm against her ribs, but her mind was a whirlwind of variables. The 217 was up there, carrying Mercer and the flaw she had documented. The 219 was its wingman, both of them operating under the exact thermal conditions her models had flagged. The sun was gone now, leaving only a thin ribbon of orange on the horizon, and the stars were beginning to claim the sky. Emma looked up, searching for the telltale streaks of supersonic flight, but the battle was happening hundreds of miles away and tens of thousands of feet up. She thought about Colonel Hale, sitting in his padded chair, watching the digital icons on the big screen. She wondered if he was seeing the gap. She wondered if he remembered the 7 pages of paper he had tossed into the mud. Or perhaps he was too busy being a commander to notice that his defensive line was fraying at the edges. She felt a surge of cold, analytical anger. This was the moment she had trained for, the moment she had feared. It wasn't just about being right, it was about the cost of being ignored. Minutes crawled by. The radio crackled with jargon, flight levels, vector corrections, fuel states, and then there was a shift in the tone. A voice, tight with adrenaline, called out a sensor anomaly. Emma froze, that was it. The lag. The moment where the systems failed to communicate, creating a blind spot in the northeast sector. She could almost see it in her mind. The enemy strike force, using the compression tactic she had modeled, slipping through the seam while the American radars tried to make sense of the ghost signals. She heard Mercer's voice over the frequency. He wasn't screaming. He was calm, but there was an edge to his words that she had never heard before. He was calling out a contact that shouldn't have been there. He was telling the command center that his sensors were lying to him. In that moment, Emma knew he was flying by instinct, just as her father had flown the Ag Cat. He was reading the wind of the battle because the machine had failed him. The next 10 minutes were a blur of static and frantic commands. The base seemed to hold its breath. Even Gloss had come out of his office, his face pale in the hangar's fluorescent lights. He was looking at the radio, then at Emma. There was a look of dawning horror in his eyes, the realization that the theoretical failure was currently unfolding in the dark skies above the Nevada border. He didn't say a word, but the way he gripped the edge of a workbench told Emma everything she needed to know. He knew she had been right. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the chatter changed. The frantic calls for backup were replaced by vectoring instructions for the return. The battle was over. Emma didn't know the outcome, but the lack of downed aircraft protocols meant that at least they were coming home. She sat down on a crate, the adrenaline leaving her body in a cold wave. She felt exhausted, more tired than she had ever been in her life. She pulled out her notebook and wrote the time, 20:14. An hour later, the jets returned. They didn't come in with the usual grace. They landed hard, their tires smoking on the tarmac. The 217 was the first one down. As it taxied toward Bay 3, Emma saw the damage. The sensor housing she had warned Mercer about was gone, sheared off by the stress of high-G maneuvers. But the plane was intact. Mercer climbed out of the cockpit, his flight suit soaked with sweat, his movements stiff. He didn't go to the debriefing room. He didn't wait for the medical team. He walked straight toward Emma. He stopped 3 feet away from her, his chest heaving. He looked at her for a long time, his eyes searching hers. And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the report she had given him. He handed it back to her. It was stained with oil and sweat, but the numbers were still legible. He told her in a voice that was barely a whisper that she had saved his life. He told her that the gap was real, and that if he hadn't known it was there, he wouldn't have looked for the enemy where they were hiding. He told her that the 217 fuel line had surged exactly when she said it would, but because he was expecting it, he had been able to manage the throttle and keep the engine alive. Emma took the paper. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt a profound sense of relief, followed by a renewed determination. She looked past Mercer and saw Colonel Hale walking toward them. He looked older, his face lined with the weight of the night's events. He didn't look at Emma. He looked at the 217, at the missing sensor housing, and at the man who had survived a mission that should have been a disaster. Hale stopped in front of them. He looked at the crumpled report in Emma's hand. He didn't apologize. Men like Hale didn't apologize to mechanics, but he did something else. He told Emma to follow him. He told her that there was a meeting in the briefing room, and that she was the only one with the data they needed to understand what had happened. He turned and walked away, expecting her to follow. Emma looked at Mercer, who gave her a tired, encouraging smile. She looked at Gloss, who was standing by the hangar door, watching her with a newfound respect. And then she looked at her notebook. She turned to a fresh page and wrote the date and the time. She didn't write about the battle or the praise. She wrote 3 words: "The system moved." She walked toward the briefing room, her boots clicking on the floor with the same rhythmic precision as the colonel's. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She was the one who saw the patterns. She was the one who read the wind. And as she stepped through the doors of the command center, leaving the rain and the shadows behind, Emma Carter knew that her journey was just beginning. She had earned the sky, and she was never going to let it go. The silence of the simulation room was a heavy, artificial thing, built from the low-frequency hum of cooling fans and the faint, rhythmic pulse of server racks. For Emma Carter, it was the sound of her life, a quiet, mechanical heartbeat that never asked for anything but precision. She sat in the dim glow of the powered-down console, her fingers still resting near the controls, though the screens had long since gone dark. She was acutely aware of the world outside this small, windowless sanctuary. After her recent encounter with Colonel Hale, the margin for error in her professional life had not just thinned, it had practically evaporated. She was walking on a wire of her own making, suspended over a void of court-martials and discharged dreams. The footsteps in the corridor were what broke the spell. They were rhythmic, heavy, and purposeful, slowing as they approached the door. Emma didn't move. She didn't even breathe. The handle turned, and the door swung open, spilling a rectangle of harsh hallway light across the carpet. Captain David Mercer stood there, framed by the brightness. He wasn't in flight suit or blues. He wore civilian clothes, a simple jacket and jeans that made him look younger, less like a decorated pilot and more like a man caught in the wrong place at the right time. He looked as surprised to see her as she was to see him, his hand still frozen on the doorknob. For a long, agonizing moment, they simply stared at each other, the air between them thick with unspoken questions. "Carter," he finally said. His voice was low, carrying a note of disbelief. He stepped into the room and the door clicked shut behind him, plunging them back into the twilight of the simulation bay. Sir, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the frantic thudding in her chest. She stood up slowly, her hand instinctively moving toward the notebook open on the console beside her. It was a worn, black-bound book, its pages filled with her small, precise handwriting, equations, flight paths, thermal stress variables, and the jagged lines of a prophecy no one wanted to hear. Mercer's eyes traveled over the room. He looked at the simulator, its screens dormant but still warm from her hours of unauthorized use. He looked at her, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way she stood, coiled like a spring. Then his gaze landed on the notebook. He walked closer, his movements cautious, as if he were approaching a sensitive piece of unexploded ordnance. He didn't pick it up, he knew better than to touch a mechanic's personal data, but he leaned in just enough to read the top page. His expression shifted, a complicated dance of recognition and something that looked very much like fear. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "For months," she said. "Since the day I arrived. Every night I could sneak away. Most nights, really." Mercer didn't look away from the notebook. He was a pilot. He understood the language of the numbers she had scribbled there. He saw the way she had mapped the Northeast Corridor, the way she had identified the microscopic vulnerabilities in the airframes of the 217 and the 219. "I read your report," he said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "The one you gave me. I read it 3 times, Carter." Emma watched him, her heart in her throat. She was too careful with herself to let hope take root. Hope was a variable she couldn't control, and she hated variables. But there was something in the way Mercer was looking at her work, a rigor, a genuine engagement, that made her stand a little straighter. "And I think you might be right," he admitted. He said it quietly, like he was confessing to a crime. He was talking about the gap in the formation, the specific vulnerability she had identified that would leave a hole in their defensive coverage if they ever faced a coordinated strike. "I ran some of your data by a friend at Air Combat Command. Informally, of course. No names, no specifics on where it came from. He told me the pattern you identified was consistent with threat modeling he'd seen in classified briefings. Stuff that someone with your security clearance shouldn't even be able to guess at. Emma felt a shift in her chest. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something adjacent to it. It was the feeling of being seen after years of existing as a ghost in the hangar. "What did you do with that?" she asked, her voice cracking just slightly. Mercer looked at the floor, the shadows of the room deepening around him. "Nothing yet," he said. The almost hope settled back down, cold and heavy like lead. "Why?" Because Mercer said, and now the frustration was evident in his tone. He sounded like a man who had spent the last week arguing with a stone wall. "Because going to Colonel Hale with information sourced from a maintenance specialist who has been running unauthorized, late-night simulations is not a conversation I can win. That's not me dismissing you, Carter. That's me telling you the truth about how this institution works. Rank is the currency here, and right now you're broke." "I know how it works," Emma said, her voice flat. "Then you know why I haven't moved on it," he replied. "I know why you haven't done anything," Emma said, taking a step toward him. "I also know that knowing why something doesn't happen doesn't change the fact that it isn't happening. It doesn't change the outcome when those planes go up. Understanding the bureaucracy doesn't stop the 217 from failing when the thermal stress hits critical." Mercer was quiet for a moment. The weight of her words seemed to hang in the air between them. He pulled over a rolling chair and sat down, a gesture that surprised her. It was a casual claiming of space in a room where he had no more official right to be than she did at this hour. He was no longer the officer in that moment. He was a pilot looking for the truth. "Tell me something," he said, looking up at her. "The 217 and the 219. Your thermal stress model. Walk me through it. Not the summary you wrote for the report. Give me the math. Give me the logic." Emma looked at him steadily. She saw the challenge in his eyes, but she also saw the respect. She opened her notebook to the relevant page, the one covered in delta symbols and heat transfer coefficients, and she began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes, her voice never wavering. She explained how the specific alloy used in the newer batches of fuel line connectors responded to the rapid pressure changes of the Northeast Corridor's atmospheric profile. She explained how the 217 cooling system had a lag of 3 milliseconds that, under high-G maneuvers, could lead to a cascading sensor failure. Mercer listened. He didn't just hear her, he listened in the way she had learned to distinguish from the performative attention of other officers. He asked questions at the right moments, sharp, incisive questions that forced her to defend her logic. He pushed back twice on points where her assumptions were contestable, and both times he nodded when her counter-argument held. He wasn't being kind or patronizing. He was being rigorous, and rigor was something Emma Carter had been waiting for someone to offer her work for 4 long years. When she finally finished, the silence returned, but it felt different now, less like a vacuum and more like a pause. Mercer sat back, his eyes fixed on the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. "If you're right about the formation gap," he said slowly, "and if the 217 and 219 are assigned to the Northeast Corridor in an active engagement scenario, the gap opens." Emma finished for him. "Every model I have, every simulation I've run says the exact same thing. It's a mathematical certainty. How confident are you?" She met his eyes completely. "100%, sir." The word landed in the room like something solid, a physical weight. Mercer looked at her and she could almost see the gears turning in his head as he made a choice. It was a choice that could end his career just as easily as it could end hers. "I'm going to try one more time," he said, "through proper channels. I'll put my name on it this time. I'll frame it as my own tactical concern, sourced from maintenance data without specifying who flagged it. It's not ideal, and I know that, and I'm sorry for that, Carter. But it's the only way I can actually get it in front of Hale without him throwing it in the shredder the moment he sees your name." Emma thought about this. It wasn't the justice she wanted. It wasn't the recognition of her brilliance. But as she looked at the man sitting across from her, she realized it was the only available answer. "Okay," she said. "If it goes nowhere," he started. "It'll go nowhere," Emma said, cutting him off. She didn't say it bitterly. She said it with the same factual detachment she used to describe a faulty hydraulic pump. "But try anyway, because if you don't and it happens, we both have to live with that." Mercer nodded. He stood up, looking at her notebook one last time before heading for the door. "Carter," he said, pausing with his hand on the handle. "How many times have you run that Northeast Corridor scenario?" 51, she said. He was quiet for a second, his back to her. Then he shook his head very slightly, a gesture she couldn't quite read, and walked out into the corridor. The door clicked shut, and Emma was alone again in the dark. She sat there for another 10 minutes, the hum of the room feeling louder than before. Then she gathered her things, went back to the barracks, and lay down on her bunk. She slept for 2 hours, the most she had slept in 3 days. Before she closed her eyes, she opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "Mercer, April 14th. He's going to try. It won't work, but he's going to try." And underneath that, one more line, 51 times. "The window is still there." Mercer made his attempt on April 16th. Emma knew the moment he had failed because she was watching the hangar doors when he emerged from the command building at 11:40 in the morning. Even from across the tarmac, she could see the set of his jaw. It was the particular way a man's face sets when he has said everything he has to say, and none of it has mattered. He didn't look for her. He walked toward his quarters with a recalibrated stride, the way people walk when they've confirmed a dark truth they already knew. Emma went back to her work. She had the 217 on the maintenance schedule that afternoon, and she went over it with a precision that far exceeded the standard checklist. She documented every anomaly, every measurement that deviated from the factory specification by even a fraction of a millimeter. She was building a wall of evidence that no one would read. By the end of the shift, she had 12 pages of documentation on the 217 alone. 12 pages that lived in her notebook because no official logbook was willing to hold them. Gloss came by at 3 that afternoon. The maintenance chief was a man who had spent 22 years learning how to fit into the machinery of the Air Force. He stood and watched her work for a long moment, which was unusual for him. "Heard there was another conversation with command about your analysis," Gloss said. Emma didn't look up from the fuel line she was inspecting. "Heard it the same way I heard the first one, Chief. Sideways, Carter." Something in his voice made her stop. She looked at him. Gloss wasn't a bad man. He was just a man who had been molded by the institution until he was the shape of a gear. "I want you to be careful," he said, his voice lowering. "I'm always careful, Chief. I mean it. Hale doesn't forget when someone makes him feel like he's missing something. He doesn't take correction well, especially from anyone he thinks should be listening rather than talking. After that report incident when he threw your work out the window in front of everyone, that was a message." "I know it's not a me problem, Chief," Emma said, her voice tight. "No," Gloss said quietly, "but the consequences will be. Just keep your head down. Do good work. Let it go, Emma, for your own sake." Emma looked down at the fuel line connector in her hands. It was the same one she had been flagging for 6 months. She could see the micro-fracture now as clearly as a crack in a pane of glass, though to any other eye it looked perfect. "I can't let it go," she said, "because if I let it go, someone is going to get hurt." Gloss didn't say anything else. He walked away, leaving her alone with the 217. Emma held the connector in her hands, thinking about the gap that was still there, the one no one with the power to close it was willing to see. 2 days later, the world changed. The alert came at 2 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't the measured tone of a drill or the periodic test of the base's readiness. This was the real thing, a sharp, jagged sound that sent the entire base from sleep to frantic motion in under 4 minutes. Emma was already awake. She had been in the simulation room, running the Northeast Corridor scenario for the 54th time. She felt the change in the base before she heard it. It was a shift in the quality of the air, a specific frequency of movement that signaled an emergency. She stepped out into the corridor just as base personnel were streaming toward their stations. She caught fragments of conversation, multiple contacts, restricted airspace, Northeast Corridor. The stone in her chest, the one that had been sitting there for months, became something harder and colder. She stood in the corridor for exactly 3 seconds. Then she moved. The base command center was a place Emma Carter had never been. It was access-controlled, populated by flight officers, intelligence specialists, and command personnel. It was a cathedral of high-level decision-making, and it was absolutely off-limits to a maintenance specialist. She went there anyway. The airman guarding the entrance was young, his face tight with the stress of a night that had gone horribly wrong. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," he said, his hand moving toward his holster. "I need to speak to whoever is coordinating the intercept formation," Emma said. Her voice was steady, projecting a level of authority she didn't technically possess. "Right now, ma'am, I can't let you. The 217 and the 219 are in the active rotation," Emma interrupted. "They have documented system vulnerabilities that I have been trying to flag for months. If they are assigned to the Northeast Corridor in the current formation, You are going to have a gap in your defensive coverage that the contacts you're tracking will find within 8 minutes. I need to speak to someone right now." The airman stared at her, his resolve wavering. "How do you know about?" "Because I've been running the scenario for 3 months," she snapped. 54 times, let me in. I can't let you in without authorization." Emma looked at him for 1 second. Then she said, "Then get me someone who can authorize it and do it fast because the clock is already running." The airman picked up his radio. His voice was uncertain, but he was acting, which was all Emma needed. She waited in the corridor, her hands empty. She had no folder, no printed reports, no meticulously typed memos. Everything she knew was inside her head. And right now, what she knew felt like it was pressing against her ribs, trying to get out. The radio crackled. A moment later, the heavy door opened and Captain Mercer appeared. He looked at Emma's face and a look of grim recognition crossed his features. He didn't ask what she was doing there. He didn't ask how she knew. He simply looked at her like a man watching the first drops of a predicted storm begin to fall. "Tell me what you know," he said. Quickly, Emma told him. She gave him 30 seconds of pure, unadulterated data. No preamble, no apology. The 217, the 219, the Northeast Corridor gap, the 8-minute window, and the compression strike pattern that would inevitably exploit it. Mercer's face was a mask of controlled tension. "The 217 is already assigned to the Northeast Corridor," he said. "Who's flying it?" "Morrison." "Is the 219 in the formation, second position?" Emma closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Then she opened them. "You need to pull them. Reassign the Northeast sector. The formation as currently configured has a gap that I know," Mercer said, his voice raw. "I read your report, Carter. I believed you then and I believe you now. Then I can't pull 2 aircraft from an active intercept formation based on the word of a maintenance specialist," he said. "Not without Colonel Hale's authorization. Hale won't give it." "I know what Hale will do," Mercer said, and for a moment he looked completely exhausted. "But he's the commanding officer. I don't have a choice." Emma looked at him, then at the door behind him, and finally back at his face. He was a man caught between what he knew to be true and what the institution allowed him to do. "Then ask him," she said. "Ask him right now. And when he says no, ask him to let me in." Mercer stared at her. "That's not ask him," Emma repeated. "Let him say it to my face this time. Not a folder in a trash can, not a message through a middleman. Let Colonel Marcus Hale look at me and tell me I'm wrong while enemy aircraft are in our sky." The corridor was alive with the sound of the base at war, the distant roar of engines, the frantic shouts of personnel. Inside the command center, radars were painting the sky, and 2 aircraft with fatal flaws were being sent to the one place they couldn't survive. Mercer looked at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," he said. "And Carter, whatever happens in the next 2 minutes, do not flinch." Emma walked into the command center. The room was a hive of activity, dominated by a large central display table where Colonel Hale stood. He was watching the radar feeds with his back to the door, his posture radiating the absolute confidence of a man who had never been required to admit a mistake. He heard the door, and when he turned and saw Emma, his face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, irritation, and then a cold, simmering rage. "What is she doing in here?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "Sir," Mercer said, stepping forward. "I need 60 seconds of your time." "Mercer, we are in the middle of an active engagement. The Northeast Corridor, sir. The 217 and the 219. There is a documented system vulnerability that affects their performance under these specific conditions. I believe it creates an exploitable gap in our formation. We have been through this," Hale said, his voice like grinding stone. "We have been through this more than once, Captain, and I am not going to stand here. What formation are the contacts flying?" Emma asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like a gunshot. Hale turned to her, and the look he gave her was one of pure, unfiltered disdain. "Sergeant Carter, you have 5 seconds to explain why you are in this room before I have you escorted out in handcuffs." "What formation?" Emma asked again, her voice never changing. "Because if it's a split compression strike with a leading faint element, the Northeast Corridor gap will open in approximately 8 minutes from the point of formation commitment. The 217 and 219 will not be able to compensate due to the thermal stress degradation I have been trying to report for 6 months." The room went deathly still. It wasn't because they believed her yet. It was because the sheer specificity of her statement was impossible to ignore. Every person in that room who understood the stakes felt a sudden, cold prickle of doubt. One of the intelligence officers at the radar display turned around slowly. "Sir," he said, his voice trembling, "the contact formation." It is a split compression pattern, two leading elements in a faint cluster at bearing 273. The silence that followed was a vacuum. Emma counted the seconds, 4 of them, as Hale looked at the radar display, then at Emma, then at Mercer. For the first time in her life, she saw a crack in the colonel's armor. "How do you know that pattern?" Hale asked. "I built the scenario," Emma said, 54 times. I built it because every piece of data I had pointed to this exact configuration as the highest probability offensive approach against our current posture. Without access to classified threat assessments. "Yes, sir. And you're telling me your model matches what's on that screen?" "I'm telling you to pull the 217 and 219 and reassign the formation before the window opens," she said. "Sir." Every eye in the room was on Hale. He was a man who lived by the rules, and Emma Carter had just broken every one of them to save his pilots. He looked at the radar, then at the clock. The contacts were moving. The window was closing. "Can you prove the gap you're describing?" Hale asked. "Put me in the cockpit," Emma said. The room stopped breathing. Mercer went perfectly still. Even the air conditioning seemed to die down, leaving nothing but the sound of Emma's heart and the ticking of the digital clock on the wall. "You're a mechanic," Hale said. "I'm the person who has been flying that corridor in simulation for 3 months," Emma countered. "And I am the only person in this building who has run this specific scenario enough times to know exactly where it breaks and exactly how to close it." Hale looked at the radar. The contacts were committing. The pattern was exactly what she had predicted. "Sir," Mercer said quietly, "she's been right about the formation. She was right about the 217. She's been right about everything." Hale's jaw worked, the muscle at the corner of his eye twitching. He was fighting a war inside himself, a war between his pride and the reality staring him in the face. He looked at the display, then back at Emma. "Can you really fly?" he asked. "I can," Emma said. The silence lasted 6 seconds this time, 6 seconds of the world hanging by a thread. Then Hale turned to the officer on his left. "Get me Morrison on the radio." The officer moved instantly. Hale looked at Mercer. "What's her simulation flight time?" "Extensive, sir. She's been running this scenario for months." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer there is," Mercer said, refusing to blink. "Morrison's on the line," the radio officer called out. "Sir, he's reporting a pressure irregularity on the 217. He's requesting a systems check." Hale closed his eyes for 2 seconds. When he opened them, he looked at Emma with an expression she had never seen, not warmth, but a grim, heavy respect. "Sergeant Carter, if I put you in that aircraft and you get it wrong, I will personally see to it that you never see the sun again." "I won't get it wrong," Emma said. "That is exactly what every pilot who has ever gotten it wrong has said," Hale replied. "With respect, sir, none of them spent 3 months building the scenario from the other side." The intelligence officer yelled out, "Sir, the contact formation is past the decision point. The faint element is separating." Hale looked at Emma. "How long?" 7 minutes, she said, "maybe 7.5. The atmospheric conditions are running cooler, which widens the window slightly, but the gap will open regardless." "Merc, you're in the lead," Hale barked. "Carter goes up in the 219. You cover her until she's established in the northeast sector. After that," he paused, looking at Emma. "After that, you follow her lead. Move, both of you." Now, Emma was already out the door. She didn't run. She moved with a calculated, rhythmic speed. She burst out into the cold Nevada night, the air sharp and smelling of jet fuel and ozone. Mercer was right behind her, his boots pounding the pavement. The base was a cacophony of sound, engines screaming, voices shouting, the deep mechanical roar of a world waking up to war. Emma was running toward a fighter jet she had never flown outside of a computer program. She was running toward a destiny she had built for herself in the dark, stolen hours of the night. "Carter," Mercer shouted over the noise, "talk to me. What's your actual stick time?" "0, she said, not slowing down. "0, he repeated as if the word were a foreign language. "The simulators are calibrated to within 0.3% of actual flight performance." She yelled back, "I have over 400 hours in them. I know the 219 control profile better than I know my own handwriting. 0 stick time doesn't matter. It better not." Mercer replied. They reached the flight line where the 219 was being prepped. Emma suited up with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had practiced the motions 1,000 times in her head. The G-suit, the harness, the helmet, everything felt familiar yet terrifyingly real. Torres, a young specialist from her bay, saw her and nearly dropped his wrench. "Sergeant Carter," he stammered. "She's cleared," Mercer yelled. "Get her in." Torres looked at Emma, and for a second time seemed to slow down. He didn't ask questions, he just saw the look in her eyes and understood that the world had turned upside down. The starboard fuel flow regulator, Torres said, leaning close as he helped her into the cockpit. It's been running 2% high. Compensate on your throttle settings in the first climb. 2%, Emma noted. Got it. And then she was in. The cockpit of the F-22 wrapped around her, a familiar embrace of screens and switches. She felt the vibration of the engine as it roared to life, a physical force that rattled her bones. This wasn't a simulation. There were no reset buttons here. She looked out through the canopy at the dark expanse of the runway. She could see Mercer's jet pulling into position ahead of her. Her hands moved over the controls with a precision that was purely instinctual. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore, and she wasn't just an analyst. She was the only person who knew how to save the sky. The 219 engine hummed, a deep, predatory growl that vibrated through the seat and into her spine. For years, she had touched these machines with the reverence of a surgeon, knowing every bolt, every wire, every microscopic flaw. Now she was the ghost in the machine, the consciousness that would guide this multi-million-dollar heap of titanium and carbon fiber through the very eye of the needle she had discovered. Checklist complete, she whispered to herself, her voice lost in the roar of the afterburners. The tower's voice crackled in her ear, tense and urgent. 219, you are cleared for immediate departure. Northeast corridor engagement. Vector 0 to 4 to 5. Emma didn't hesitate. She pushed the throttle forward, feeling the massive surge of thrust as the F-22 screamed down the runway. The acceleration was a physical blow, pinning her back into the seat, stealing the breath from her lungs. This was the one thing the simulator couldn't perfectly replicate, the sheer, crushing weight of reality. But as the nose lifted and the ground fell away, Emma felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. She was in the air. She was flying. The world below became a blur of dark desert and flickering baselights. She banked the plane, following Mercer's tail lights into the blackness of the upper atmosphere. The cockpit displays glowed in a soft green and blue, showing her the world through the eyes of the radar. There they were, the contacts, moving exactly as her model had predicted. The split compression pattern was unfolding across the screen like a dance she had already memorized. Mercer's voice came through the comms, steady and reassuring. I'm on your wing, Carter. How's she handling? She's running a bit hot on the starboard side, just like Torres said, Emma replied, her fingers dancing over the trim controls. But I've got her. You've got 7 minutes, Carter, Mercer said. Make them count. Emma looked at the digital clock on her HUD. The countdown had begun. She wasn't just flying toward an enemy. She was flying toward the gap, the invisible flaw in the world that only she could see. And as she pushed the stick forward, diving into the cold, thin air of the northeast corridor, she knew that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just fixing the machine. She was the machine. The sky was vast, indifferent, and tonight it was a battlefield. Emma could feel the 219 straining under her command, the airframe groaning as she pushed it toward the limits she had calculated in her notebook. She wasn't thinking about Hale, or the rank she didn't have, or the rules she had broken. She was thinking about the 8-minute window and the lives that hung in the balance. The gap was coming, and she was the only one who could close it. As the first indicators of thermal stress began to flicker on her display, Emma adjusted the throttle with the delicate touch of a master pianist. She knew exactly how far she could push the 217 and 219 before the alloy connectors failed. She knew the rhythm of the pressure changes. She knew the secret language of the wind. I see the opening, she said into the comms, her voice as cold as the air outside the cockpit. Then take it, Mercer replied. Emma Carter closed her eyes for a split second, feeling the heartbeat of the plane through the control stick. Then she opened them, banked hard to the left, and dived into the void. The F-22 responded with a violent, beautiful grace. The G-forces tore at her, pressing her into the seat until her vision began to tunnel, but she didn't let go. She steered the aircraft into the exact coordinates of the formation gap, the point where the enemy's feint would meet their vulnerability. On the radar, the enemy elements were shifting. They had seen the hole. They were committing to the strike, but Emma was already there. She wasn't where the formation was supposed to be. She was where the formation needed to be. The 219 sensors locked onto the lead contact. The tone in her headset was a high-pitched, steady scream. Target acquired, she said. In the command center, miles below and centuries away, the room was silent. Colonel Hale stood frozen, his eyes glued to the display. He watched as a single blip, the one he had tried to keep grounded, moved with a precision that defied logic. He watched as the gap he had denied existed was filled by the woman he had tried to silence. "She's doing it," someone whispered. Emma didn't hear them. She was alone in the cockpit, a girl with a notebook who had finally found her way into the sky. She pulled the trigger, not because she wanted to kill, but because the math demanded it. The missile streaked away from the rail, a spear of light in the darkness, and the enemy's perfect pattern shattered into 1,000 pieces. The engagement lasted only seconds, a frantic blur of heat and motion. When it was over, the radar was clear. The contacts were retreating, their formation broken, their strategy defeated by a variable they hadn't accounted for. Emma leveled the plane, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. 219, this is lead, Mercer's voice crackled. Good hit. Let's bring it home. Copy that lead, Emma said. She turned the nose of the F-22 back toward the base, toward the lights of the runway and the world she had left behind. She knew that when she landed, there would be questions. There would be investigations. There would be a reckoning. But as she looked out at the stars, she knew one thing for certain. She had run the scenario 55 times. And this time it was the only one that mattered. The descent was a slow, meditative process. The 219 seemed to relax as the air thickened, the thermal stress alarms finally falling silent. Emma watched the horizon, where the first faint light of dawn was beginning to touch the edge of the world. She felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but beneath it was a quiet, unbreakable satisfaction. She had seen the truth, and she had acted on it. The landing was smoother than any simulation. The wheels touched the tarmac with a soft thump, and the drag chute deployed, pulling her back into reality. As she taxied the aircraft toward the hangar, she saw the crowd gathered there, ground crew officers, and at the very front, Colonel Hale. She shut down the engine, the sudden silence of the cockpit feeling heavier than the roar had ever been. She sat there for a moment, her hands resting on her lap, watching the canopy slide open. The Nevada air rushed in, cold and sweet. She climbed down the ladder, her legs feeling like lead. Torres was there, his eyes wide, his hands trembling as he reached out to help her. "You did it, Sergeant," he whispered. "You actually did it." Emma didn't answer. She walked toward the group of officers, her posture straight, her face a mask of professional detachment. She stopped in front of Colonel Hale and Captain Mercer. "Aircraft 219 is back on the line, sir," she said, her voice steady. "The starboard fuel regulator will need a full replacement before next flight." Hale looked at her. He didn't speak for a long time. The anger was gone, replaced by something much more complicated, a realization of just how wrong a man could be. He looked at the 219, then back at Emma. "Sergeant Carter," he said, his voice quiet. "Report to my office at 0800. "Yes, sir," she said. He turned and walked away, his shoulders tense. Mercer stayed behind, looking at her with a mix of awe and relief. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm tired," Emma said. "Go get some sleep." Mercer told her, "You've earned it." Emma walked back to the barracks, the morning sun finally breaking over the mountains. She felt like a different person than the one who had snuck into the simulation room months ago. She went to her bunk, sat down, and opened her notebook to the very last page. She picked up her pen and wrote one final entry. April 18th, 55 times. The window is closed. She closed the book and laid it on her chest. As she drifted off to sleep, she didn't dream of equations or thermal stress or formation gaps. She dreamed of the sky, vast and open, and finally, truly hers. The morning light filled the room, touching the worn edges of the notebook and the grease-stained hands of the woman who had rewritten the rules of the world. Emma Carter slept, and for the first time in 4 years, she wasn't counting the seconds. She was just living them. The Raptor and the world contracted to the size of that cockpit. Everything beyond the canopy blurred into insignificance, leaving only the tactile reality of the seat against her back and the familiar geography of the instrument panel. Emma knew this layout as well as she knew the floor plan of her own barracks room. Her fingers moved with a muscle memory that bypassed conscious thought. As the canopy descended, the mechanical whine of the motors sealing it shut felt like a final goodbye to the world she had known. Once the seal was complete, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, artificial hiss of her own breathing through the oxygen mask. She took one breath, just one. It was a grounding ritual, a way to anchor her soul to the machine. In that brief moment of stillness, her mind drifted back to the potato fields of her childhood. She could almost see her father banking his old crop duster over the green rows in the soft, golden light of dawn. He didn't just fly. He read the wind with his entire body, sensing the subtle shifts in pressure as if the aircraft were an extension of his own nervous system. Then, the memory shifted, darker and colder. She thought about the accident report she had found years later, the sterile language used to describe a catastrophic structural failure that shouldn't have happened. She thought about being 14 years old, standing in a quiet house, and the decision she had made then, a decision so absolute it had defined every day of her life since. She had decided what her life was going to be for. It wasn't about glory or even the act of flying itself. It was about the integrity of the machine and the lives held within its metallic skin. She put the thought away. She didn't need the memory anymore. The motivation had served its purpose, bringing her to this exact point in time. Every decision that needed to be made had already been finalized in the quiet hours of her life. Everything that came next was not a choice, but execution. The radio crackled to life, the voice of the tower controller cutting through her focus. 219, this is Tower. You are cleared for emergency departure, runway 22. Winds are 270 at 12. Mercer, you are lead. Carter, a pause followed. It was the kind of pause that contained an entire institutional crisis compressed into half a second. The sound of an establishment realizing its rules had just been rewritten by necessity. Carter, you are authorized. Call the ball. 219 copies, Emma said. Her voice was a flat line of professional calm. There was no tremor, no excitement, only the steady output of a woman who had already seen this moment play out 1,000 times in her mind. She taxied the F-22 onto the tarmac. She did not perform the abbreviated checks of a pilot in a desperate hurry. Instead, she ran the precise and complete checks of someone who understood exactly what she was about to ask this machine to do. She needed every system confirmed, every sensor calibrated, and every hydraulic line pressurized to specification. Torres's note about the fuel flow regulator sat at the forefront of her mind, accounting for the thermal stress indicators she saw on the airframe. According to her mental calculations, the aircraft was within the acceptable range for the expected duration of the engagement. She projected the weapon systems active, watching the green status lights flicker across the board like a digital affirmation. 6 minutes until the window opened. She rolled onto the runway. Ahead of her, Mercer's aircraft was a dark silhouette, its running lights steady points of defiance against the desert night. His voice came through her helmet, sounding strained but focused. Carter, stay tight on my 6 until we're established. Then you have the lead in the northeast sector. I'll cover your flanks. Copy, Emma replied. There was another silence from Mercer, and she could hear him choosing his words, struggling to bridge the gap between the sergeant he had known yesterday and the pilot she was tonight. Carter, you've been the smartest person at this base for 4 years. Time to prove it out loud. Emma didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't take longer than the time they had left. She pushed the throttle forward. The F-22 responded instantly, moving from a slow crawl to a predatory sprint. Then it accelerated, and she felt the thing that no simulator, no matter how advanced, had ever been able to fully replicate. It was the physical insistence of the machine. The sheer, overwhelming weight of the G-forces pressing her into the seat as the runway disappeared beneath her. The desert floor fell away, turning into a vast, dark void, and the night sky opened up in every direction, enormous, indifferent, and perfect. Her body processed the transition with a speed that surprised even her. Her proprioceptive sense expanded to encompass the aircraft's attitude, the subtle vibrations of the air over the wings, and the resistance of the controls. She felt the way the aircraft wanted to move versus the way she needed it to move. The simulator had been the best preparation anyone could have asked for, but it had not been the same. The real thing was this, a crushing weight of noise, speed, and consequence. She leveled off at altitude. Mercer's aircraft was 300 meters to her left and slightly ahead, a flickering shape in the darkness. Carter, the tower's voice returned. Contacts bearing 045, range 60 miles and closing. Confirm you have the picture. Emma checked her multi-function display. The glowing symbols were exactly where her model said they would be. The adversarial formation was executing the compression strike pattern she had spent 3 months deconstructing in her unauthorized simulations. The faint element was already separating to the southwest, a calculated distraction designed to pull the defenders away from the true objective. It was moving exactly as she had warned Colonel Hale it would. The primary strike elements were holding their bearing, pushing toward the northeast corridor, aiming for the gap that was about to open. She checked her timer. 5 minutes and 40 seconds. I have the picture, Emma said. Mercer, the faint element to the southwest is going to try to draw us out. Do not follow it. It's a bait. The real pressure is coming from 045 and 062 simultaneously. They're timing it to hit the corridor while we're displaced. You're sure? Mercer asked. I've watched them do it 54 times, Emma said. Yes, I'm sure. A beat of silence passed over the encrypted channel. Then Mercer's voice came back, sounding different, relinquished. Then lead is yours, Carter. Talk me through it. She didn't talk to him the way she had talked in her reports. She didn't use the careful, documented, source-heavy language of a maintenance sergeant trying to convince a skeptical institution. She spoke the language of the live thing, the real-time geometry of the engagement as it played out in her head. Southwest Feint is going to commit in 90 seconds, she said, her eyes tracking the closing speeds. When it does, hold your position. I'm going to push northeast and close the gap before the primary elements reach it. Once I'm established, the compression geometry breaks. They can't execute the strike without the timing window, and I'm going to take that window away from them. And if they adjust, Mercer pushed. They'll have two options, Emma said, break off or commit to a direct engagement on unfavorable terms. Either way, we win. You sound very calm, Mercer noted. I've done this before, Emma replied. In a simulator? Yes, she said. In a simulator 54 times. The 55th time is right now. The Southwest Feint committed. Emma watched the icon on her display surge forward with aggressive intent. In the tower, the controllers began to call the movement with rising urgency, their voices jumping an octave. Contacts bearing 230, range 40, closing. Mercer, Carter, the Southwest element is, hold, Emma said, her voice flat and clear, cutting through the panic. It's a bait. Hold. Mercer held his position. The feint pushed harder, crossing inside the 40-mile mark. It was a masterful piece of tactical theater, an approach designed to trigger a defensive reflex, to pull the pilots out of position and create the very displacement they needed to exploit. It was a tactic that would have worked perfectly against any pilot following the standard formation response. But Emma Carter was not interested in the standard response. Northeast now, she said. I'm going. She pushed the throttle and banked the Raptor into a hard turn toward the northeast. The acceleration was a physical blow, a sensation of absolute rightness as she moved in exactly the direction her model dictated. The 54 previous iterations had made the geometry of this engagement as familiar to her as the layout of her maintenance bay. She wasn't guessing, she was remembering the future. The primary strike elements saw her coming. On her display, the neat formation of the adversaries began to shift. She saw the slight hesitation in their flight paths, the momentary adjustment of their vectors. It was the exact moment the tactical picture changed for the people on the other side of the radar screens. They were seeing a defensive response they hadn't projected. They're adjusting, Mercer reported, watching from his position. Primary elements are splitting. 045 is pushing. 062 is pulling back. 045 is the aggressive element, Emma said. They're going to try to force me out of the corridor by direct pressure. Let them try, Carter, Mercer said, his voice gaining a hard edge of confidence. They're closing fast. I know, she said. Let them try. What happened over the next 4 minutes would be replayed in classified briefings for years to come. It wouldn't be studied because it was the most technically complex aerial battle in history. It wasn't. Nor would it be analyzed because the aircraft were performing beyond their mechanical specifications. They were operating exactly as designed. It would be replayed because of the choices made by the pilot of aircraft 219. The sequence of maneuvers Emma executed was so precisely calibrated to the behavior of the adversarial formation that later analysts would claim she must have had a direct link to the enemy's tactical computers. She appeared to anticipate every adjustment before it was even executed. But there was no secret link, no magic. There was only the fact that Emma Carter had lived this moment in a dark simulation room at 4 in the morning for 3 months. She had understood something the Air Force hierarchy had never given her credit for. The best tactical mind in the sky isn't the one with the most medals or the highest rank. It is the mind that has looked at the problem from the most angles with the most honest willingness to see the truth. The 045 element pushed. Emma did not flinch. She did not displace. She held the corridor with a surgical precision that closed the gap she had been warning about for 6 months to exactly 0. The compression strike timing, the very foundation of the adversary's strategy, began to dissolve. The window they required simply no longer existed. 062 is breaking off. Mercer's voice crackled with a sound she hadn't heard before, a mix of awe and pure adrenaline. 045 is pulling back. Carter, they're pulling back. Emma watched the contacts on her display. The primary strike elements were disengaging, their formation unwinding as the tactical logic that had sustained them ceased to hold. The Southwest Feint, no longer able to fulfill its role in a strike that was no longer happening, turned tail and followed. "Tower, this is Carter," Emma said, her voice as steady as if she were reading a grocery list. "Northeast corridor is secure. Contacts are withdrawing on all bearings. Formation integrity is holding." The silence from the tower lasted longer than any operational silence should have. It was the silence of people trying to reconcile what they had just seen with what they thought they knew. Then, "Copy, 219, we copy." Emma throttled back. She held her altitude and heading, allowing the adrenaline to process through her system. She didn't suppress it, nor did she perform it. She simply let it move through her and settle. Her hands on the controls remained completely steady. Throughout the entire 4 minutes of live combat, she had not experienced a single second of doubt. Doubt was a luxury for those who didn't know what they were doing. Emma Carter had known exactly what she was doing since the 51st time she had run this scenario in the dark, while the base slept, and the institution that employed her remained entirely unaware of the asset it possessed. Carter Mercer's voice came through again. He sounded like he was working very hard to stay within the boundaries of professional communication. "Mercer," he started, then paused. That was the most precise defensive engagement I have ever seen executed in a live environment. Emma was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the display, watching the retreating contacts, and then out at the clean, empty expanse of the Northeast corridor. She had held it with an aircraft she had never physically flown, against an adversary she had modeled from open-source data in a room she wasn't supposed to be in. "I know," she said quietly. It wasn't arrogance. It was the same flat, precise truth she had always offered, the only kind she knew how to give. "Tower 219 requesting return to base. 219, you are cleared, runway 22, and Carter." Another of those pregnant pauses. The CO wants a word when you're down. Of course he does, Emma thought. She turned the Raptor toward home. The landing was smooth, though not perfect by her own simulation standards. She felt the physical reality of the runway, the crosswind that was slightly stronger than the weather data had suggested, and that tiny 2% fuel flow irregularity Torres had mentioned. But it was controlled, the kind of landing that came from an internal understanding of the aircraft. She had read its technical documentation until she could recite the hydraulic response curves from memory. She had spent 400 hours preparing for the 55th iteration. She taxied to the line. As the canopy opened, the night air hit her face, cold, immediate, and real. It was a stark contrast to the pressurized, filtered environment of the cockpit. Torres was already there. He caught the canopy rail as she climbed down the ladder, looking at her with an expression she had never seen in all their months of working together. He looked open, unguarded, almost undone. "Sergeant Carter," he said, and then his voice failed him. He couldn't find the words for what he had witnessed on the monitors. 2% fuel flow, Emma said, breaking the tension. "Thank you for the heads up." Torres just nodded, unable to speak. He stepped back, and Emma saw the rest of the ground crew. Every member of the night maintenance team was there. 12 people who had watched her climb into that cockpit 40 minutes ago with looks of disbelief and alarm. They stood in a loose circle on the tarmac, motionless, watching her. Emma looked back at them. No one spoke, but a wordless acknowledgement passed between them. It was the kind of recognition that didn't require language because language would have been too small to carry it. One of the crew members, a woman named Diaz, who had rarely spoken to Emma in 3 months, reached out and put a hand briefly on Emma's shoulder as she passed. It was just a touch, lasting only 2 seconds, but Emma felt the warmth of it long after it was gone. Mercer caught up with her as she walked toward the operations building. She was still in her flight suit, the physical weight of the flight still settling into her muscles. Unlike the simulator, the real flight left a residue in the body, a certain density of experience. "Hale wants to debrief in 10 minutes, Mercer said. He was walking beside her, not behind her. The shift in his position was subtle but meaningful. "I know," Emma said. "Carter." He stopped walking. Emma stopped too and turned to face him. His face was illuminated by the harsh tarmac lights, and she saw a look that was a close cousin to guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the 4 months I had your report and didn't push harder." Emma looked at him. She thought about the folder in the trash. She thought about the corridor outside the briefing room where she had been told to keep her head down. She thought about the handwriting of men like Patterson, who wrote outside scope of maintenance function as if it cost them nothing. "You got me in the room tonight when it mattered," she said. "That's a very generous accounting," Mercer replied. "It's an accurate one," Emma said. "I'm always accurate." Something that was almost a smile flickered across Mercer's face before it was replaced by a more somber gravity. "Hale's not going to enjoy this debrief," he noted. "No," she agreed. "He's going to be in a room where he has to confront the fact that he was wrong. Not just about tonight, but about the 217, about the report, about—" Mercer stopped, but Emma finished it for him. "About me." "Yes," Mercer said. Emma started walking again, her boots rhythmically striking the pavement. "Good," she said. "He should be in that room. It's the only place where anything changes." They entered the operations building. The corridor felt different than it had 40 minutes ago. It was the same hallway, the same beige walls, the same hum of the ventilation system, but Emma was different in it. The people she passed looked at her differently. The space between who she had always been and who the institution was now forced to see her as was beginning to close. Slowly, painfully, but irreversibly. Colonel Marcus Hale was waiting in the debrief room. He was standing at the far end of the long table, his posture rigid. He was a man who needed to be standing for what was coming. His face was a mask of control, but Emma could see the effort it took to maintain it. She walked in and stood directly across from him. Hale spoke first. "The engagement outcome," he began, but Emma cut him off. "Sir," she said quietly, "I don't need you to explain the outcome to me. I was there." A heavy silence followed. Hale's expression shifted. It wasn't humility yet, but it was the first crack in the ice, the acknowledgement that the ground had shifted under both of them. They couldn't pretend it was the same world they had inhabited that morning. "The 219 sustained no damage," Hale said, his voice professional. "No American aircraft were lost. The adversarial formation withdrew without achieving any objectives. Your engagement tactics have been recorded in full and will be subject to formal analysis." "I understand," Emma said. "The northeast corridor vulnerability you identified." Hale paused, looking down at the table for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "It was real. Your model was accurate. The documentation you submitted, the maintenance flags, the stress analysis, the data was valid." Emma waited. She didn't offer him an easy way out. "I should have." Hale started, but he couldn't finish the sentence. "Sir," Emma said, and she said it with a surprising gentleness. She didn't want to spare him, but she understood that being proven wrong on this scale was a weight of its own. "There will be time for that conversation. Right now, I'd like to know about the 217. Did Morrison get down safely?" Hale's face softened slightly. "He did," he said. "The pressure irregularity resolved on descent. He's down." Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Good," she said. "That's what matters," and she meant it. She had always meant it. Through 4 years of closed doors, through every ignored report and every condescending comment about the scope of maintenance, her focus had never wavered. It wasn't about her ego. It wasn't about being right. It was about the aircraft landing safely. It was about the pilot coming home. It was about making sure the components didn't fail in the field, 3 miles from where a young girl might be watching from a fence. Hale looked at her for a long time. Then he did something he had never done. He nodded to her. It wasn't a perfunctory nod of command, it was a nod of genuine acknowledgement. "Sergeant Carter, you are to remain on base pending a formal review. Flight status will be addressed as part of that review. You will be present for all debrief sessions." "Yes, sir," Emma said. She turned to leave. "Carter," she stopped and looked back. Hale was watching her with a look of profound confusion and realization. The look of a man standing in the rubble of a certainty he had built his career upon. "How many times," he asked, "did you run that scenario?" 54, she said, "before tonight." She walked out of the room, through the building, and back into the cold Nevada night. Above her, the stars were out, vast, brilliant, and entirely indifferent to the rankings of men. She stood on the tarmac alone for a moment, looking up. She thought about her father. She thought about the wind. She thought about the 14-year-old girl who had made a quiet, absolute decision. She felt the weight of the notebook in her pocket, filled with the numbers that had been right all along. Then she went back to Bay 3. She didn't go there because she was told to, but because the aircraft still needed maintenance. The work didn't stop just because a battle had been won. Emma Carter had always understood that the most important work happened when no one was watching. She picked up her wrench and stepped back into the world of metal and oil. By 5:15 in the morning, she was deep into her routine. Bay 3 was the one place where she had always known her place in the world. After a night that had rewritten her life, she needed the familiar shape of her tools and the predictable resistance of the bolts. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and began the post-flight inspection on the 219. She brought the same discipline to this task that she brought to every other, a refusal to let the drama of the night diminish the importance of the work in front of her. Torres found her there 25 minutes later. He stood in the entrance, watching the rhythmic way she moved before he spoke. "You know you don't have to do this right now," he said. "I know," Emma replied. "Most people after what you just did would be, I don't know, somewhere else." "The 219 needs a post-flight inspection," Emma said, not looking up. "It flew a combat engagement 4 hours ago. The inspection doesn't care what the pilot did before she landed." Torres was silent for a moment, then he walked in, grabbed his clipboard, and started on the port side. They worked in the comfortable silence of two people who had developed a rhythm over months of shared labor. "Diaz told everyone," Torres said eventually. "I mean, the tower crew told the line crew, and it moved fast. Everyone knows." Emma didn't stop examining the connector. "I figured. Carter." He stopped, searching for the right words. "What you did tonight? People are going to be talking about it for a long time." "People talk," Emma said. "The aircraft still needs to be inspected." Torres let out a short, surprised laugh. It was the sound of someone realizing that some things and some people were simply unchangeable. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, it does." They finished at 6:50. Emma signed the last notation in her log, feeling a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the mission and everything to do with the machine. She was about to start on the next aircraft when Chief Petty Officer Gloss appeared. He was in his dress uniform, a rare sight for morning rounds. "Carter," he said, his voice lacking its usual bark. "Command wants you in the main briefing room at 0700. Dress uniform." Emma looked at her grease-stained coveralls. "Am I being disciplined?" Gloss held her gaze, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something like shame in his eyes. "No," he said, "you are not." She nodded. "I'll need 20 minutes. You have 30, Gloss said. He hesitated, then did something he hadn't done in over 4 years. He looked at her directly without the buffer of his clipboard or his rank. "Carter, I owe you an apology. I should have pushed harder on those reports. I knew you were right about the 217. I knew it, and I let the chain of command be an excuse." Emma stood there with her wrench, considering him. "Chief," she asked, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because Gloss said there are going to be investigators in that room asking questions about the last 6 months. I intend to tell them the truth, and I thought you should hear it from me first." Emma set the wrench down on the workbench with her customary precision. "Thank you," she said. It wasn't a moment of emotional catharsis. It was a simple transaction of the truth. To Emma, the truth was the only thing that mattered. The briefing room at 0700 was not what she expected. She had envisioned a standard debriefing, a room filled with functional equipment and low-level officers. Instead, she found 4 strangers sitting on one side of a long mahogany table, each equipped with legal pads and recorders. Colonel Hale sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who had been hollowed out by the night's events. Mercer stood against the back wall, his arms crossed, a silent witness to the proceedings. One of the strangers, a woman in her mid-50s with a sharp, analytical gaze, gestured for Emma to sit. "Sergeant Carter," she said, "we are here to discuss the events of the last 12 hours, but more importantly, we are here to discuss the events of the last 6 months." Emma sat down, smoothed her dress uniform, and placed her notebook on the table. The woman looked at the notebook, then at Emma. "We've seen your reports, Sergeant, all of them, including the ones that were never officially filed." Emma didn't look at Hale, she didn't look at Gloss. She looked at the woman and began to speak. She didn't tell a story of bravery or a story of being overlooked. She told the story of the data. She explained the thermal stress indicators, the fuel flow irregularities, and the predictable failures of the 217's avionics. She spoke about the geometry of the Northeast Corridor and the mathematical inevitability of the adversarial strike. As she spoke, the room grew silent. The investigators didn't interrupt. Even Hale stayed perfectly still. They were listening to the sound of a person who had seen the truth when everyone else was looking at their rank. When she finished, the room remained quiet for a long time. The woman in the center leaned forward. "Sergeant Carter," she said, "do you realize that if you hadn't taken that aircraft tonight, the loss of life would have been catastrophic?" Emma thought about the potato fields. She thought about the accident report. She thought about the physical weight of the G-forces and the way the stars looked from 50,000 feet. "I realized the aircraft landed safely," Emma said. "That was the goal." The woman nodded slowly. "We have a lot more to discuss, Sergeant, not just about the maintenance, but about where you belong in this Air Force." Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. She knew where she belonged. She belonged where the work was, where the truth was, and where the sky met the ground. She looked out the window at the morning sun hitting the desert, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the quiet, absolute peace of a decision fully realized. The investigation lasted for 3 weeks. For Emma, it was a period of strange, suspended animation. She was no longer working in Bay 3, though she found herself wandering near it in the evenings. She was a celebrity on base, a status she found deeply uncomfortable. Pilots she had never met would nod to her in the mess hall, and officers who had previously looked through her now looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect. She spent most of her days in a small, windowless room with the investigation team, going over every byte of data from the engagement. They were obsessed with her anticipatory tactical response, a phrase that made her want to roll her eyes. "It's just probability," she told them for the 10th time. "If you know the parameters of the machine and the objectives of the pilot, there are only so many things they can do. I didn't predict the future, I just eliminated the impossible." The lead investigator, the woman Emma now knew as Dr. Aris, smiled at that. "Most people can't do that math in their heads while pulling 7G to Kess, Sergeant." "I've had a lot of practice," Emma said. On the final day of the investigation, Emma was called back to the main briefing room. This time, it wasn't just the investigators and Colonel Hale. General Vance, the commander of the entire wing, was sitting at the head of the table. "Sergeant Carter," the general said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air. "We've finished our review. The failures in the maintenance reporting chain have been identified and are being addressed. There will be significant changes in leadership here at Eagle Ridge." He looked at Hale, who sat motionless. "But more importantly, we've been looking at your record. Not just your maintenance record, but your aptitude scores from your entry into the service. You had the highest mechanical and spatial reasoning scores in the history of the recruitment center. Why did you choose maintenance?" "Because I wanted to make sure the planes didn't fall," Emma said simply. The general nodded. "And you did. You did exactly that, but after seeing what you did in that cockpit, it's clear your talents are being underutilized." He slid a folder across the table. It wasn't a maintenance log. It was an application for the officer candidate school, followed by a direct track to flight training. "We're waiving the age and rank requirements," the general said. "We want you in the air, Carter. Not as a sergeant who happens to fly, but as a pilot who knows the machine better than anyone else in the sky." Emma looked at the folder. She thought about the F-22, the way it felt like a part of her body. She thought about the responsibility of the cockpit. "I have one condition," she said. The room went still. No one gave a general conditions. "What is it?" Vance asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I want to finish the inspection on the 219, Emma said, "personally. And I want to be the one who signs off on the 217 when its fuel regulator is replaced." The general stared at her for a moment, then he let out a laugh that shook the room. "Done," he said. Emma walked out of the briefing room, the folder tucked under her arm. She didn't go to the barracks to celebrate. She didn't call anyone. She walked straight to Bay 3. Torres was there, working on a different airframe. He saw her coming and stopped. "Well?" he asked. Emma handed him the folder. He opened it, read the first few lines, and then let out a low whistle. "A pilot. They're making you a pilot." "I'm already a pilot," Emma said. "Now it's just official." Torres grinned, a wide, genuine expression of joy. "I guess I'll have to call you ma'am soon." "Don't you dare," Emma said, picking up her wrench. "Now help me with the 219. I have an inspection to finish." They worked together for the rest of the afternoon, the familiar sounds of the hangar providing a soundtrack to the beginning of her new life. Emma Carter knew that there would be more challenges ahead. She knew that the institution would still try to box her in, and that there would be others who would doubt her. But as she tightened the last bolt on the fuel regulator, she knew it didn't matter. She had already proven she could read the wind. She had already shown she could see the truth in the dark. And as she looked up through the open bay doors at the vast Nevada sky, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The girl from the potato fields was finally home, and this time she was the one holding the controls. The sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows across the hangar floor. Emma wiped the grease from her hands and looked at the Raptor. It was more than just a machine to her now. It was a partner. She thought about her father and hoped that wherever he was, he could see her. She thought about the accident report and realized that she finally didn't need to carry the weight of it anymore. She had transformed that tragedy into a shield, a way to protect others from the same fate. As she walked out of the hangar, the cool evening breeze touched her face. She looked up at the stars as they began to appear one by one. Tomorrow, she would start her new path. Tomorrow, the world would see Emma Carter, the pilot. But tonight, she was just Emma, the woman who had stayed true to herself when the world tried to tell her she was invisible. And as she walked toward her barracks, she realized that the most important lesson she had learned wasn't about flight geometry or maintenance protocols. It was that the truth, no matter how small or how overlooked, always has its own gravity. All you have to do is be brave enough to follow it. The fluorescent lights of the briefing room hummed with a low, clinical persistence, a sound that usually blended into the background of Eagle Ridge, but now seemed to vibrate against the sudden, heavy silence. In the center of the room sat a man who didn't belong to the base's rigid hierarchy. Dr. Adrian Walsh, dressed in a civilian suit that managed to project more gravity than the silver birds on any colonel's shoulders, looked across the table at Emma Carter. He was from the Inspector General's office, an entity that usually felt like a distant myth until it was suddenly, terrifyingly real. Walsh didn't look like a hunter, but he had the eyes of a man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried because he had spent his life studying the shovels. "Sergeant Carter, please sit down," Walsh said, his voice steady and devoid of the usual military bark. "My name is Dr. Adrian Walsh. I'm with the Inspector General's office. I want to be clear from the start. This is not a disciplinary proceeding." He cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "I want to be clear about that because I know the climate you've been working in." Emma sat. The chair was cold and hard, a standard-issue piece of government furniture that felt like an anchor. She didn't fidget. She placed her notebook, the one with the frayed edges and the ink-stained cover, directly on the table in front of her. She folded her hands on top of it, her knuckles white but her posture perfect. "How long have you been at Eagle Ridge?" Walsh asked, leaning back just enough to signal that he had all the time in the world. Emma didn't have to pause to calculate. The numbers lived in the front of her mind, a tally of days spent navigating the labyrinth. "4 years, 2 months, and 18 days, she replied. Her voice was level, a technical instrument reporting data. Walsh made a small, precise note on his pad, the scratch of the pen sounding like a chisel on stone. And in that time, he continued, his gaze drifting back up to hers. "How many formal reports did you submit regarding aircraft maintenance vulnerabilities? Specifically, those you believed fell outside the parameters addressed by standard inspection protocols." Emma opened the notebook. She didn't need to flip through many pages to find the summary index she had meticulously maintained. She had the number ready because, in her world, numbers were the only things that didn't lie. 14, she said. The first was a microfracture analysis on the 217 series, submitted in my 6th week at this base. I have copies of all 14 submissions, the dates of their filing, and their final dispositions. Walsh stared at the notebook for a beat longer than was comfortable. "You kept copies of everything?" he asked. It wasn't quite a question. It was an observation of a personality trait he was beginning to recognize. "I keep copies of everything," Emma confirmed. "I have for 4 years. A flicker of something moved across Walsh's face. It wasn't surprise. Men in his position were rarely surprised. But it was the expression of a seasoned archaeologist who had walked into a site expecting to spend months excavating, only to find that the subject had already done the digging, labeled the artifacts, and organized the findings by date and significance. "May I?" he asked, extending a hand toward the notebook. Emma didn't hesitate. She slid the book across the polished wood of the table. Walsh opened it, and the room fell into a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a high-stakes reading where every second represented months of Emma's life. Emma watched him. She watched the way his eyes moved, tracking the quality of the silence as it deepened. It started as curiosity, moved into professional interest, and finally settled into something much heavier, something weighted with consequences. Walsh didn't look up as he finished the first few pages. Instead, he passed the notebook to the person sitting to his left. He turned his full attention back to Emma. "These maintenance flags," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "The thermal stress analysis, the formation vulnerability documentation regarding the Northeast Corridor." He paused, letting the names of the reports hang in the air like an indictment. "You developed this analysis independently without access to classified threat assessments?" Emma nodded. "Yes," she said. "I used publicly available data, open-source threat development analysis, historical engagement records from declassified sources, and pattern modeling I built myself. It was based on 4 months of simulation study, mostly conducted in the off hours." She felt a small spark of the old defiance flare up in her chest. "I can walk you through the methodology if you'd like. I have the raw data sets and the algorithmic logic mapped out in the back." Walsh looked at her for a long, searching moment. "I would like that very much," he said softly. "But first, I want to understand something fundamental." He leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the table. "You submitted these reports through proper channels. They were ignored, buried, or dismissed. Why did you keep submitting them?" Emma looked down at the table for a moment, seeing the reflection of the overhead lights in the grain of the wood. Then she looked Walsh directly in the eye, the weight of 4 years of isolation behind her gaze. "Because I knew I was right," she said. "And because knowing you're right and staying quiet about it, especially when the consequence of staying quiet is that someone eventually gets hurt, that's not something I'm capable of doing." She took a breath, her voice thickening just slightly. "My father was a pilot. He died because a component failed. A component that should have been caught, that someone probably knew was failing but didn't want to report because it was inconvenient for the schedule. I have spent my entire career making sure that doesn't happen to someone else. I don't know how to stop doing that just because the institution finds it annoying." The room was so quiet that the sound of a distant jet taking off felt like an explosion. At the end of the table, Colonel Marcus Hale was looking down at the surface in front of him, his face a mask of neutral stone, but his jaw was tight enough to crack bone. Walsh wrote a single, long sentence on his legal pad. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "I need to tell you something that may be relevant to your understanding of what happens next." He glanced at the colleagues beside him, and a silent, professional communication passed between them. A decision that had clearly been reached before Emma even walked through the door. "Your formation vulnerability analysis," Walsh continued, "specifically the model you developed for the compression strike scenario in the Northeast Corridor gap. It was reviewed this morning. We had 2 analysts from the Pentagon's Air Threat Assessment Division look at it." Emma waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Their assessment," Walsh said, and he paused as if to ensure she was truly listening, "is that your model matches, to a statistically significant degree, the classified threat projection models that were developed using intelligence resources you had absolutely no access to." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. It was the kind of silence that changes the molecules in a room. Emma heard Mercer, who was standing against the back wall, shift his weight, the leather of his gear creaking. She heard Hale set a pen down on the table with a sharp click, but she kept her eyes locked on Walsh. "How close a match?" Emma asked, her voice a whisper of its former self. "Close enough," Walsh said, choosing his words with extreme care. That one of the analysts initially asked whether there had been a massive security breach at the Pentagon. There had not been. The conclusion is that you arrived at the same threat assessment independently, through a different methodology, and reached conclusions entirely consistent with the intelligence community's most guarded analysis. Emma sat with that. She thought about the simulation room at 4 in the morning, the blue light of the monitors reflecting off her glasses. She thought about the 54 iterations of the same flight path, the way she had obsessed over the micro fluctuations in fuel pressure. She thought about the accident report she had read 17 times when she was 14 years old, learning how to trace the line of a tragedy backward until she found the exact moment where the trajectory became fixed. She thought about all the folders that had been returned to her over the last 4 years, stamped with outside scope, or not forwarded, with intolerance. "I know," she said quietly. Walsh blinked, surprised for the first time. "You know," he repeated. "I mean, I knew my model was right," Emma said. "I didn't know about the classified assessments, obviously, but I knew the math held up. I knew the physics were sound. That's why I kept submitting it. The truth doesn't change just because people refuse to look at it." Walsh looked at her for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Colonel Hale. In that look was something Emma recognized instantly, the look of a person deciding exactly how much of a reckoning was about to occur, and in what order the heads would roll. "Colonel Hale," Walsh said, his voice deceptively soft, "I'd like to discuss the disposition of Sergeant Carter's reports." Hale looked up. His face was the face of a man at the end of a very long night, at the beginning of a very long accounting. The arrogance that usually defined his posture had been replaced by a heavy, slumped weariness. "Yes," he said, his voice raspy. "So would I." What followed was 3 hours of the most precise, grueling, and uncomfortable conversation Emma Carter had ever witnessed. and she had been part of some very uncomfortable conversations in her time. Walsh and his team went through every single one of Emma's 14 reports. They cross-referenced them with the official disposition records, which showed with documentary clarity the chain of dismissals. It was a paper trail of negligence, gloss to Patterson, Patterson to Hale, and Hale to the wastebasket. In one particularly damning instance, a report had been literally tossed out a window into the rain. Lieutenant Colonel Gloss was the first to testify. He was honest in the way he had promised Emma he would be, brutally, specifically, and without softening the parts that cost him his dignity. He admitted he had known Emma's thermal stress analysis was credible. He admitted he had let the institutional hierarchy be an excuse not to push harder, preferring the comfort of the status quo to the friction of a fight. He said it all on the record, his voice flat and defeated. Emma sat across from him and felt a strange pang of respect. Honesty at such a high personal cost was its own form of courage, even if it arrived years too late to change the outcome. Patterson was next, and he was a different story. He was a man who had spent 20 years learning how to use the language of the institution as a shield. He spoke of standard parameters, scope of function, and chain of command with the precision of a lawyer. He tried to distribute the weight of the failure across the entire system, making it sound like a series of unfortunate procedural hiccups rather than a deliberate silencing of a subordinate. Walsh listened to him with a terrifying, icy patience. Then, he asked a question that cut through the bureaucratic fog like a scalpel. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, in your professional assessment, was Sergeant Carter's microfracture analysis on the 217 technically sound? Patterson went silent. The clock on the wall ticked 4 times, each one sounding like a hammer blow. Yes, he said finally. And yet you returned it marked as outside scope of maintenance function, Walsh countered. Let me ask again, regardless of the scope, was the work technically sound? Yes, Patterson said, his voice barely audible. Emma didn't look at him. She was looking at her notebook, which Walsh had returned. She found the first entry for the 217, the dates, the measurements, the warnings she had shouted into a void. She thought about how much simpler everything would have been if someone had just looked at the data back then, 6 months before the simulations, before the unauthorized sorties, before the lives of pilots were put on the line for the sake of a clean spreadsheet. Colonel Hale went last. He sat across from Walsh, with Emma to Walsh's left. Hale looked at Emma once before he began speaking, a single, fleeting glance, and then he didn't look at her again for the rest of his testimony. It was the most revealing thing Emma had ever seen. It wasn't contempt she saw in his eyes, nor was it the dismissal she had grown so used to. It was something that, in a man like Marcus Hale, looked remarkably like shame. He was thorough. She had to give him that. He didn't minimize his role or hide behind Patterson's procedural excuses. He described his decision-making with a directness that clearly cost him every ounce of his pride. He acknowledged the morning he had thrown her report out the window. He acknowledged that he hadn't even read it before doing so. Most importantly, he acknowledged that when Mercer had brought the same analysis to him on the night of the engagement, he had resisted it not because the data was bad, but because of the person who had produced it. I want to be precise about that, Hale said, his voice steady only through a massive, visible effort. It wasn't that I evaluated Sergeant Carter's analysis and concluded it was wrong. It was that I didn't evaluate it at all. I saw where it came from and I concluded it couldn't be worth evaluating. That was my failure. It was not a failure of process or a failure of the system. It was a failure of my judgment, mine alone. The room was paralyzed. The admission was so total, so complete, that there was nothing left for Walsh to dig for. Walsh wrote a final note on his pad. Colonel Hale, is there anything else you'd like to add for the record? Hale was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, and for the first time, he sounded like the leader he was supposed to be. Sergeant Carter spent 4 years at this base being exactly the kind of asset this institution claims it wants. She was technically exceptional, analytically rigorous, and committed to mission outcomes above personal recognition. She followed every protocol. She used every channel. She was dismissed at every single point. He paused, his voice cracking slightly. The failure was not hers. The record should be absolutely clear about that. Emma looked at him then. He was still staring at the table, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his own words. For 4 years, she had lived in rooms where people talked over her, around her, and through her. This was the first time someone with his rank had spoken about her in a way that was simply, purely true. She expected to feel triumphant. She had imagined this moment in the dark hours of the simulation room, thinking that vindication would feel like a great weight being lifted from her chest. Instead, it felt like grief. A quiet, specific grief for all the time wasted, for the 14 reports and the 54 simulations that should have been a single conversation and a promotion. She felt grief for the version of the story where someone had just listened. After the testimony concluded, Walsh called a recess. The investigators gathered their laptops and files and filed out of the room, leaving Emma alone at the table. The recording devices were still there, their little red lights glowing like embers. Mercer came in a few minutes later and sat down across from her. "You okay?" he asked. Emma looked at her hands. "I don't know," she said. "I thought being right would feel better than this." Mercer leaned forward, his face kind. "Being right was never your problem, Emma. The problem was that the institution wasn't built to recognize it when it wasn't wearing the right uniform." "I know," Emma said. "That's what I'm grieving." "What happens now?" Mercer asked. "For you, I mean, what do you want to happen?" Emma didn't have to think about it. She approached her own life with the same cold, analytical precision she brought to a fuel line. "Flight status," she said. "Real flight status. Not an emergency authorization, not a temporary citation. I want to fly. I've always wanted to fly. I just knew I had to earn the right to say it out loud." Mercer smiled, a small, sad thing. "You earned it 4 years ago." Emma shook her head. "I earned it tonight. That's how it works. Not how it should work, but how it does." Mercer's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Walsh's team is going to recommend a formal review of all promotion and qualification records at Eagle Ridge," he told her. "They're also going to overhaul the report processing chain. Your documentation is going to be the blueprint for the new system." Emma nodded, accepting the information as a logical outcome. "But there's something else," Mercer said, his voice dropping. "The Pentagon analysts who reviewed your model. Walsh told you they were struck by the match. What she didn't tell you is that one of them is here, and she asked to meet you personally." Emma looked up, her interest piqued. "Who?" "Brigadier General Patricia Co., Mercer said. Air Combat Command. She's the one who built the original classified threat projection model your analysis matched." Emma felt a jolt of electricity run through her. She knew that name. CO was a legend in tactical circles, the woman who had redefined how the Air Force looked at asymmetric threats. "She's at Eagle Ridge?" Emma asked. "She arrived this morning," Mercer confirmed. "She watched the engagement footage and asked Walsh to make sure you were available at 1400. Emma sat with that. A brigadier general who had all the resources of the United States intelligence apparatus had reached the same conclusion she had reached alone in a dark room. It was a validation more powerful than any IG report. "She built the same model," Emma said slowly, mostly to herself. "She built it with everything, and I built it with nothing." Mercer nodded. "Nothing but you, Carter. Just you." Emma thought about her father. She thought about him reading the wind with his skin, feeling the subtle shifts in the atmosphere before the instruments even registered them. She thought about the 14-year-old girl who had decided, with a quiet and absolute certainty, what her life was going to be for. She had spent 20 years building the tools to fulfill that promise, working in stolen hours and using borrowed access. She had never once come close to abandoning that faith in her own perception, no matter how hard the world tried to beat it out of her. "What time?" Emma asked. 1400, Mercer repeated. Emma nodded and stood up. She looked at her notebook, turning to a fresh page. She wrote the date and the time. She wrote, "Walsh office. 14 reports confirmed credible. Pentagon model match confirmed. Hale testified on record." She paused, the pen hovering over the paper. Then she wrote one more line. 55 times the window closed. She shut the notebook and tucked it into her chest pocket, right where it had always lived. It sat over her heart, a shield made of paper and truth. At 12:30, Emma found herself in a corner of the mess hall, eating a meal she couldn't taste. For the first time in years, the table around her wasn't empty because people were avoiding her. It was empty because people were afraid to approach her. The news of the IG hearing was spreading through the base like a wildfire. She learned later that 3 things happened in quick succession while she sat there. First, the engagement footage from the Northeast Corridor was formally classified as a significant tactical event. Second, the 217 was grounded for a full structural review based on her exact protocols. And third, a request was processed through administrative channels for Sergeant Emma Carter's file to be reviewed for flight qualification. The request was marked urgent and was signed by General CO herself. Mercer found her again at 1350, just outside the conference room where the general was waiting. She signed it before she even met you, Emma, he whispered. She saw the footage, she saw the data, and she signed it. Emma processed that, tracing the effect back to the cause. A general of that stature didn't make impulsive decisions. She had seen the mind behind the model, and she had recognized it. Carter, Mercer said as she reached for the door handle. You've been preparing for this meeting your whole life. You just didn't know it. Emma took a breath, straightened her uniform, and pushed the door open. Brigadier General Patricia Co. was 61 years old, with hair like spun silver and a posture that demanded the room rearrange itself around her. She was standing by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. When Emma entered, Co. turned, and her eyes were identical to Emma's, calculating, measuring, filing every detail away. They stood in silence for a moment, two generations of the same relentless intellect facing each other. You built the compression strike model from open-source data, Co. said. It wasn't a question, it was a starting point. Yes, ma'am, Emma replied. Walk me through the methodology, Co. commanded. Emma sat down, opened her notebook, and began to speak. For 90 minutes, the room disappeared. The meeting had been scheduled for 30, but time ceased to matter. They spoke in the rare and urgent language of people who think in the same register. Co. pushed back on Emma's assumptions, testing the structural integrity of her logic. Emma defended her points with ferocity, conceding only when Co. pointed out a variable she hadn't considered, and then immediately calculating how to adjust the model to account for it. Co. watched her throughout, her expression unreadable until Emma conceded a point about fuel-to-weight ratios in high-G turns. Do you know why I'm writing that down? Co. asked, her pen poised over a pad. Because I updated the model in real time, Emma said. I didn't get defensive. I saw the better data and I integrated it. Co. nodded. Most people can't do that. Most people are more invested in being right than in being accurate. Those aren't the same thing. Emma looked at her. I've had 4 years of being right and having it mean nothing. Accuracy is all I have left. Co. set her pen down and looked out the window. Sergeant Carter, she said, her voice softer now. I have spent 30 years in this command watching this institution do exactly what it did to you. I've watched it happen to women, to enlisted personnel, to anyone whose excellence didn't fit the predetermined mold. I haven't always done enough to stop it. She turned back to Emma. You built a system of insight in your spare time in a room you weren't supposed to be in, using data you weren't supposed to have. What do you want? And don't tell me what you think you're allowed to ask for. I want to fly, Emma said, her voice clear and ringing. I want to do this work at the level it deserves. I never want to be in a position again where the only place I can run a scenario is a simulation room at 4 in the morning because no one will give me the keys to the real thing. And I want the system to change so the next person doesn't have to wait 4 years to be heard. Co. looked at her for a long time. That's a large ask, she said. I know, Emma replied. I've been working up to it for a long time. A ghost of a smile touched Co.'s lips. I signed your qualification request this morning, she said. I know, Emma replied. Mercer told me. I signed it because of the footage, Co. continued. But I'm confirming it because of this conversation. You'll be attached to the Tactical Analysis Division as a consultant while your flight training proceeds. And those 14 reports, they're being entered into the official record today with your name as the primary author. Emma stood and Co. offered her hand. It was the handshake of an equal, a firm and steady recognition of shared competence. One more thing, Co. said as Emma reached the door. The simulation room in Building 7. You've been using it unauthorized for over 400 hours. Emma went still, her heart skipping a beat. Yes, ma'am, she said, meeting the general's gaze. Co. held her eyes for a long, precise moment. Consider it authorized, she said, retroactively. Emma walked out into the corridor, the sounds of the base rushing back in to meet her. The afternoon light was stretching long across the floor. She put her hand on the notebook in her pocket. She thought about the 55th time she had run the simulation, the time when the window finally stayed open. She thought about her father and the wind. She walked back to Bay 3, where the aircraft were waiting. They were always waiting, indifferent to the politics of the men and women who tended to them. Tomorrow, Emma Carter would go back to work. But for the first time in 4 years, she wasn't working in the shadows. The wrench in her hand and the mind in her head were finally being used for the same purpose. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of her life. The wall she had been pushing against for so long had finally given way, and the momentum of her struggle had nowhere to go. She still woke up at 4 a.m., her body buzzing with the residual alert of a soldier who had been at war with her own surroundings for too long. But as she walked across the tarmac in the pre-dawn light, she realized the grief was fading. It was being replaced by something sturdier. She wasn't just a sergeant in a maintenance bay anymore. She was a pilot in waiting, a consultant to the Pentagon, and the living proof that the truth, if held onto tightly enough, could eventually crack even the hardest stone. She looked up at the sky, where the first hints of blue were breaking through the dark. The window was open, and this time she was the one who was going to fly through it. The transition wasn't seamless, of course. There were still those who looked at her with suspicion, men who had been part of the system that ignored her and now felt the sting of her ascent. But they were noise, background radiation in a world governed by the signal of her own competence. She spent her days in the maintenance bays, still turning wrenches, still checking for the micro-fractures that others missed. But her afternoons were spent in the tactical rooms, sitting across from officers who now had to listen to her analysis of the Northeast Corridor. She found that she didn't need to raise her voice anymore. When she spoke, the room went quiet. Not because of her rank, she was still a sergeant, but because they knew she had seen the future before they had, and they couldn't afford to be blind again. She often thought about the 54 simulations she had run in secret. Each one had been a brick in the foundation of the person she had become. They hadn't been a waste of time, they had been her training. As the 6-week mark approached, the formal notification arrived. Her flight qualification review was complete. She had been cleared for the advanced pilot program, bypassing the introductory phases thanks to her documented simulation hours and her performance during the real-world engagement. The news didn't come with a ceremony or a parade. It came in a simple manila envelope delivered to her locker. Emma opened it alone. She read the words "cleared for flight status" and felt a sudden, sharp memory of her father's cockpit, the smell of ozone and old leather, the way the world looked when you were high enough that the lines on the ground disappeared. She took her notebook out one last time and turned to the very last page. She didn't write a data set or a model update. She simply wrote, "Grounded no longer." She tucked the notebook away, not in her pocket this time, but in a small box she kept for things that were finished. She walked out of the locker room and toward the flight line. The sun was hitting the silver skin of the jets, making them glow with a fierce, blinding light. She wasn't an outsider looking in anymore. She was a part of the machine, the ghost in the system that had finally found its voice. And as she stepped onto the tarmac, Emma Carter knew that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just tracking the trajectory. She was the one in control of it. The human mind is a creature of habit, a finely tuned instrument that learns to play the music of its environment. For 4 long years, Emma Carter's mind had been a fortress, conditioned to expect resistance at every turn. It was a mind that had learned to navigate the world through shadows, to anticipate the no before it was even spoken, and to find the gaps in a system that seemed designed specifically to keep her out. Now, as the walls of that system began to crumble, her mind didn't quite know what to do with the sudden, jarring absence of resistance. It was like a person who had spent their entire life leaning against a heavy door, only for someone to finally unlock it from the other side. She found herself stumbling forward into the light, blinking, unsure if the ground beneath her feet was finally solid. She still went to the simulation room every night, though the necessity of hiding had vanished. General CO had made it abundantly clear that Emma no longer needed to haunt the base like a ghost, but the simulation room was where she thought best. It was a cathedral of data, a place where the chaos of the world was distilled into manageable variables, and the thinking still needed to happen. Even with her new status, even with the eyes of the high command finally resting upon her with something resembling respect, there was a mountain of processing to be done. The formal attachment to the Tactical Analysis Division meant she now had official access to the very materials she had spent months reverse engineering from scraps and open-source intelligence. Walking into the high-security archives for the first time felt like entering a library of her own thoughts. She sat at a sleek terminal, her fingers hovering over the keys, and pulled up the classified threat assessments and current formation protocols. Reading them was a surreal, almost haunting experience. As she scrolled through the screens of glowing text, she kept finding things she had already figured out. She saw the same patterns, the same vulnerabilities, the same looming shadows of enemy intent that she had documented in her 14 discarded reports. It was a strange sort of vertigo, the realization that the top-secret intelligence she had been forbidden from seeing was merely a more expensive, more polished version of the truth she had already discovered in the dark. But there were gaps, too. Even in the inner sanctum of the Air Force's intelligence, there were holes she had already identified months ago. She found herself marking up the margins of the digital files in her mind, correcting the assumptions of colonels and analysts who had never touched a wrench or felt the vibration of an engine through their boots. And as she read, she felt a quiet, simmering grief that she was still learning to name. It was the grief of seeing official language, printed in classified ink, confirming everything the institution had spent 4 years telling her she wasn't qualified to know. Every top secret stamp felt like a fresh bruise, a reminder of the time lost and the lives risked because the truth had been gated behind rank and protocol. Torres noticed she was quieter than usual. He was a man who understood the language of silence better than most, having spent decades listening to the rhythm of hangars and the unspoken tension of aircrews. He said so on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of her transition, while they were working side by side in Bay 3. The rhythm of their work hadn't changed, even if nearly everything around it had. The smell of hydraulic fluid and ozone was the same. The weight of the tools in their hands was the same. It was the one place where Emma felt she didn't have to perform her new identity. Here, she was just the person who knew how the machines breathed. "You're in your head," Torres said, not looking up from the panel he was inspecting. "I'm always in my head," Emma replied, her voice echoing slightly in the vastness of the bay. "More than usual," he countered. Emma paused, her hand tightening around a wrench. She considered denying it, falling back on the defensive habits that had served her for so long. Then she set the tool down and looked at him. She owed Torres the truth. He had been the one to flag the fuel flow regulator when no one else would listen. He had been the first person on the tarmac when she had landed after the engagement, his presence a silent anchor in the storm. He had put his hand briefly on her shoulder in the dark that night, and that 2-second gesture had stayed with her longer and meant more than any of the official commendations that had followed. "I keep thinking about the version of this that didn't happen," Emma said softly. "The version where someone actually reads the first report. The version where the 217 gets pulled from the rotation in February. The version where nobody has to wait for enemy aircraft to penetrate American airspace just to find out I was right." She stopped, her eyes tracking the lines of the aircraft before them. That version would have been better for everyone. Torres was quiet for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of the hangar's ventilation system. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice gravelly and honest. "It would have." He picked up his clipboard, looking at the long list of maintenance tasks. "But it's not the version we got." "No," Emma said, "it's not." "So what do you do with the version you got?" Torres asked, looking her in the eye. Emma picked up her wrench, feeling the cold, hard steel against her palm. She thought about Brigadier General CO and the words she had spoken in the sterile silence of the conference room. Words about building systems that capture insight regardless of where it comes from. She thought about the 14 reports, the 6 months of being ignored, the 54 simulations run in secret, and the 2 seconds of a hand on her shoulder in the dark. She thought about the cost of being right in a system that valued the messenger more than the message. "You use it," Emma said, her voice gaining a new kind of strength. "Every piece of it, even the parts that cost you." Torres nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. It was the nod of a man who had seen the world break people and had seen others use the pieces to build something stronger. They went back to work, the clink of metal on metal filling the silence of the bay. The formal review board convened in the 5th week, and the atmosphere was a far cry from the adversarial tension of the Inspector General's investigation. This was a different kind of room, filled with people who had already accepted the facts and were now trying to determine what to build from the ruins of their previous assumptions. Emma walked in and saw the familiar faces. Walsh, 2 officers from Air Combat Command, a flight surgeon, and a senior instructor from the Air Force Academy's Advanced Tactics program. At the head of the table sat Brigadier General CO, possessing the same purposeful stillness that Emma had come to associate with power in its purest form. They reviewed the engagement footage, all 41 minutes of it. Emma sat in silence, watching the blue and red icons dance across a large screen at the front of the room. It was a profoundly strange experience to watch her own life and death decisions play out with the detached clarity of recorded telemetry. The data didn't care about her rank. It didn't care that she wasn't supposed to be in that cockpit. It simply measured her velocity, her angle of attack, her reaction times, and the terrifyingly precise way she had dismantled the enemy's tactical advantage. The radar display was an unbiased witness to her competence. The Air Force Academy instructor, a man named Colonel Whitfield, had the compact, considered manner of someone who had spent 30 years turning good pilots into legends. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen as the footage reached the moment Emma had refused the southwest feint. He paused the playback, the frozen icons vibrating slightly on the display. He replayed it once, then twice, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he looked at Emma over the top of his glasses. "You made that call in under 2 seconds," Whitfield said, his voice devoid of any emotion other than professional curiosity. "The faint commitment, the decision to hold position under 2 seconds." "Yes, sir," Emma said, her voice steady. "Most pilots with full tactical training take 4 to 6 seconds in a live engagement environment," he noted, pausing to let the weight of that statement sink in. "What were you doing in those 2 seconds?" Emma took a breath, searching for the honest answer. She didn't want to sound arrogant, but she didn't want to hide anymore either. "Confirming," she said. "I had already made the decision 54 times in the simulation. I wasn't deciding in that moment, sir. I was confirming that the real-world conditions matched my model closely enough that the decision still held. It did, so I held." Whitfield looked at the frozen image on the screen, then at General CO. There was a silent exchange between them, a professional shorthand that Emma could sense, but not fully translate. It was the look of two people realizing they were witnessing a paradigm shift. "What's your threat pattern recognition accuracy in simulation?" Whitfield asked. "Across the scenarios I've run, it's 91% in the first 30 seconds of engagement," Emma replied. "That rises to 97% after 60 seconds, as additional behavioral data confirms or updates the initial assessment." The room went deathly quiet. Major Hanks, the flight surgeon who had been scribbling notes all morning, looked up, her pen pausing midair. "Those numbers," she said carefully, "are those self-reported?" "They are in my training logs," Emma said. "I documented every session, every failure, and every success. The logs are in the notebook you have in front of you." Hanks looked at Walsh, who gave a brief, solemn nod of confirmation. Hanks turned back to Emma, her expression one of genuine shock. 97% at 60 seconds, she whispered. "That's..." She didn't finish the sentence, instead looking down and writing something with a frantic energy. Whitfield unpaused the footage. They watched as the icons on the screen began to shift again. They watched Emma close the gap in the northeast corridor, her movements on the screen appearing almost predatory in their efficiency. They watched the adversary formation hesitate, then begin to fray at its tactical seams as the timing window they had built their entire mission around dissolved into nothing. They watched the contacts withdraw, retreating from a ghost they couldn't outmaneuver. When the footage finally ended and the screen went black, the silence in the room was heavy with the weight of realization. It was General CO who finally broke it. "Flight qualification," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "Expedited track recommendation?" "Approved," Whitfield said without a moment's hesitation. "Approved," Major Hanks added, her eyes still on Emma. The two Air Combat Command officers looked at each other. One of them, a lieutenant colonel named Reyes, leaned forward. "I want to note for the record that I've been reviewing tactical engagement footage for 11 years, he said, "and I have never seen a first-time live engagement executed with that level of precognitive accuracy." He paused, his gaze hardening into one of respect. "Approved." CO looked at Emma. "The expedited flight qualification track is 8 weeks, she explained. "At the end of it, if you complete the requirements, and based on what I've seen, that is not a question of if but of when, you will receive official flight status as a commissioned officer." Emma held herself perfectly still, the words echoing in her mind. "Commissioned officer," she repeated softly. "The promotion review is concurrent with the flight qualification," CO continued. "Your record, the Inspector General's findings, and the engagement documentation together constitute a case that the promotion board found." She paused, choosing her next word with the precision of a jeweler. "Unambiguous." Emma looked down at the table for a moment. She thought about the 14 reports, the folders thrown in the trash, the times she had been told her insights were outside the scope of maintenance functions. She thought about the folder that had been tossed out a window into the rain, only to be resurrected as exhibit in an investigation that was changing the face of the Air Force. "I have a question," Emma said. "Of course," CO replied. "The 14 reports, the formal acknowledgement you mentioned. What does that look like specifically?" It was Walsh who answered this time. "Each report will be entered into the Eagle Ridge institutional record with its original submission date. Full credit will be given to you as the author. The disposition record, the account of how each report was handled, will also be entered completely, without redaction." "Including the disposal methods?" Emma asked, her voice quiet but sharp. A pause rippled through the room. "Yes," Walsh said. "Including those?" Emma nodded. She thought about what that meant, not for her career or her promotion, though those were significant, but for the record itself. The permanent, unchangeable institutional record would now show that Emma Carter had been right. It would show that she had been right 14 times, that she had followed every rule, and that the system had failed her. The record she had written about in her notebook years ago, the one she believed would eventually matter, had finally caught up to the truth. She had been right about that too. The 8 weeks of flight qualification that followed were the hardest thing Emma had ever endured, yet they were also the most alive she had ever felt. It wasn't hard because she struggled with the material. She had spent years learning these aircraft from the marrow out. She knew every bolt, every sensor, and every line of code. The physical act of flying, which she had once feared might be a barrier she couldn't cross, turned out to be something her body accepted with an eerie, natural ease. Her instructors noted it, then noted it again, and finally simply stopped noting it, accepting that she was a pilot who had been born in the wrong uniform. What was hard was the sheer pace of it. It was the compression of 4 years of deferred longing into 8 weeks of official permission. It was the experience of being in a cockpit with the full weight of the institution behind her, rather than fighting against it. It felt, at times, like breathing pure oxygen after years of living on rationed air. It was overwhelming in its sufficiency. Her primary flight instructor was a captain named Osi, a man with a reputation for being demanding in the specific way that only the truly great teachers are. He didn't demand perfection out of cruelty. He demanded it because he refused to pretend that anything less was acceptable from someone capable of more. He had reviewed Emma's simulation logs before their first flight, and he had entered the cockpit with the expression of a man who had been told a fairy tale and was waiting to see if the dragon was real. He verified the dragon in the first week. By the 3rd week, Osi stopped correcting her altogether. Instead, he started asking her questions. By the 5th week, he was bringing her scenarios he had developed himself, stress tests designed to break her threat recognition against patterns she hadn't seen in the standard manuals. Emma didn't flinch. She simply updated her mental models in real time, showing no defensiveness when she made a mistake. To her, a mistake wasn't a failure, it was just more data. "You don't get defensive when you're wrong," Osi remarked after a particularly grueling session in the 6th week. Emma had misread an approach angle and corrected it within 3 seconds, long before the flight computers had even flagged the error. "Being wrong is just information," Emma said, wiping sweat from her brow as they climbed out of the trainer. "Why would I be defensive about information?" Osi looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. "You'd be surprised," he said. "How many pilots see their ego as part of the flight controls? If the plane isn't doing what they want, they blame the plane. If they make a mistake, they blame the weather." "I've spent a lot of time around planes," Emma said. "They don't care about your ego, they only care about physics." Osi laughed. It was the first time Emma had heard him laugh in 6 weeks, and it seemed to change the very air between them. It made the relationship more honest, shifting from instructor and student to something closer to peers. "Carter," he said, "I want to tell you something and I want you to hear it correctly." He paused, looking out over the flight line. "I have been instructing for 9 years. I have worked with pilots from the academy, from ROC, from every pipeline we have, and I have never—" He stopped, searching for the words. "You are going to be one of the best tactical pilots this Air Force has ever produced. That is not a compliment, Emma, that is an assessment." Emma looked at him, the weight of the statement settling over her. She thought about Whitfield's 97%. She thought about CO's unambiguous. She thought about Tora's telling her to use every piece of it. "I know," she said quietly. Does that feel strange to say? Osi asked. It feels true, Emma said. Strange and true aren't mutually exclusive. The graduation from the expedited qualification track was held on a Wednesday morning, exactly 8 weeks and 1 day after the review board. It wasn't a grand ceremony. There were no marching bands, no fluttering flags, and no crowds of cheering families. It was just a quiet room containing the people who had seen the truth before the rest of the world. CO was there, along with Osi, Whitfield, Mercer, and Walsh. Even Gloss had asked to be present, and no one had seen fit to deny him. Torres was there, too. He was the only maintenance crew member in the room, standing quietly along the back wall in his dress uniform. No one had officially invited him, but he had simply appeared 5 minutes before the start, taking the same spot Mercer had occupied in the command center on the night of the engagement. And because everyone in that room knew that Torres was a part of this story, no one asked him to leave. General CO read the promotion order. The language was formal, procedural, and heavy with the weight of institutional tradition. As Emma listened, she realized that the words themselves, the titles, the ranks, the official designations, were less important than what they represented. They weren't a measure of her worth, which had been proven long ago in the dark. They were a measure of the institution's willingness to finally align its words with the reality she had already built. Lieutenant Emma Carter, United States Air Force, CO read, her voice resonant. Flight status confirmed, promotion effective immediately. CO looked up from the paper, her eyes meeting Emma's. Is there anything you'd like to say? Emma had thought about this. She had thought about it the way she thought about everything, with an eye toward the truth rather than the performance. I want to say something about my father, she began, her voice clear and steady. He was a crop duster pilot in Idaho. He died when I was 14 because a component failed, a component that should have been caught. I read the accident report 17 times. She paused, her mind flashing back to that kitchen table in Boise. I decided then that I was going to spend my life making sure the aircraft were safe, and that the people inside them came home. She looked around the room, seeing the faces of the officers who now commanded her. Everything that happened, the reports, the simulations, the night in the Northeast Corridor, all of it was that same decision, nothing else. The room was silent for a long beat. Then Mercer spoke from across the room, his voice uncharacteristically soft. For what it's worth, Carter, he would have been proud. Emma looked at him, and for a moment, the tension that had existed between them for years seemed to evaporate. I know, she said, and she meant it. The aftermath of her promotion moved with a speed that Emma found both exhilarating and exhausting. Once an institution of that size decides to change, the momentum can be staggering. The engagement footage was declassified for training purposes within 6 weeks. Soon, it was being taught at the Air Force Weapons School, not as a story of a rogue mechanic, but as a masterclass in adaptive defensive response. Colonel Whitfield's curriculum notes described the engagement in terms that Emma found accurate, and she didn't need them to be anything more than that. The structural review of the report processing chain at Eagle Ridge was completed by the 10th week. It produced 47 specific recommendations, 39 of which were adopted immediately. Emma wasn't consulted in the drafting of these new rules, but she was acknowledged in the preamble of the final report. It stated that her case had made the review necessary and that her documentation had provided the evidentiary basis for the changes. She read the preamble once, noted the date in her notebook, and then let it go. She wasn't interested in being a monument. She was interested in the work. The real shift came on a Friday afternoon in the 11th week. General CO called her into a meeting without any prior notice. When Emma arrived, CO was alone in the conference room. No folders, no recorders, just the general and the same look in her eyes that usually preceded a major shift in the world. I want to offer you something, CO said, and I want you to take your time before you answer. I'm offering you a position at Air Combat Command, Tactical Analysis and Threat Assessment Development. Emma blinked. The next generation of protocols? Precisely, CO said. You would be using your methodology for adversarial pattern modeling to build a framework that can be applied service-wide. It would be systematic. It would be the new standard. She paused, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And the position includes an active flight assignment. You would be piloting the very systems you're helping to design. Emma leaned back, her mind already beginning to model the implications. You're offering me the job of preventing the situation that just happened, at scale. Yes, CO said. That is exactly what I'm offering. Emma thought about it. She thought about the people this position was designed to help. She thought about the next person who would notice a flaw in a system, the next person with 14 reports that no one wanted to read. Is this a way to actually fix the system? Emma asked. Or is it just a way to capture my methodology without changing the conditions that made me develop it in secret? CO looked at her for a long time, her gaze unwavering. That is exactly the right question, Emma, and the answer is, it's both. The only way to make it more of the first and less of the second is to have someone in that position who will not allow it to be otherwise. Someone who knows exactly what the wrong conditions cost. Emma looked out the window at the flight line. She thought about the version of her who had been 18, arriving at Eagle Ridge with a notebook full of dreams and a heart full of Idaho dust. She thought about the person who had spent 4 years in the shadows, waiting for a door to open. Yes, Emma said. I'll take it, but I have one condition. CO raised an eyebrow. Only one? The framework I build. It has to be accessible to everyone, Emma said. Maintenance personnel, intelligence analysts, everyone whose job involves understanding how things fail, not just the officers. The insight has to be able to move. It can't be gated by rank. CO smiled, a genuine, warm expression that Emma had never seen before. That will require a lot of institutional negotiation, Lieutenant. It's going to be a long fight. I'm good at patient, Emma said. Emma Carter flew her first official mission as a commissioned officer on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks later. The air above the Nevada desert was clear and cold, a vast expanse of blue that seemed to go on forever. She was flying the very aircraft she had once maintained with her own hands, and the synergy between pilot and machine felt absolute. She didn't think about the milestones or the reports or the simulations while she was in the air. She simply thought about the mission, the physics, and the beautiful, complex data of the world around her. But when she landed and the canopy hissed open, letting in the sharp desert air, she sat in the cockpit for exactly 30 seconds. She reached into her flight suit and felt the notebook in her pocket. She thought about her father. She thought about the decision she had made at 14, the decision to be the one who sees the failure before it happens. The decision had held. Through every closed door, every ignored report, and every hour spent in the dark, the truth had remained the truth. And now, as she climbed down the ladder, she saw Torres waiting for her. He didn't say a word, and neither did she. She just walked past him toward the operations building, toward the future she was already building. Somewhere, in another hangar or another simulation room, there was another person with a notebook, seeing something no one else was willing to acknowledge. Emma Carter was going to make sure that this time someone was listening, not because the system was perfect, but because she was going to make it impossible to ignore the truth. That was what genius looked like when it was finally set free. Not a flash of light, but a steady, relentless flame that refused to be put out. The work, all of it, had always been exactly what she was meant to do.